The gods did not make the world because they wished to be worshipped. They made it because they wished to be understood. The distinction matters more than any doctrine written in their names. From the Triune Canticles, Second Compact, verse 41. Disputed authorship, suppressed in year 234 of the Accord. Reinstated in year 241, following the High Cantor's review. Suppressed again in year 243, no reason given. The archive remembered everything. This was its nature and its purpose. The recorded weight of 312 years of the Accord, the collected intelligence of the Valdric Dominion's unbroken administrative machine, every treaty and census and battlefield report and theological ruling, and trade variance and census correction and battlefield correction and theological ruling correction that the Dominion had ever produced. Organized into the specific taxonomy that Asha Valdric had been refining for 15 years into something, she privately considered the most functional and honest map of the world that had ever existed. Maps lied, usually. They showed you the shape of the land and called it the truth of the place, and the shape was real enough, but the truth was in what the shape had done to the people who lived within it, and what the people had done back to the shape, and the slow accumulative argument between terrain and civilization that produced, over centuries, the particular texture of a given place. Asha's archive was not a map of terrain. It was a map of that argument. She had been maintaining it in the deep sublevels of the Dominion's seat city of Varenthal since she was 23 years old. She was 38 now. The archive had grown considerably. She was the only person who could read it all. This was not a boast. It was a logistical observation, and it was, in the specific way of logistical observations, slightly frightening. The archive had a staff of 11 catalogers, 3 indexers, 2 preservation specialists for the older materials, and a junior assistant who was extremely good at her job and would eventually be better at it than Asha if given enough time. None of them could read the full system because the full system had been built, over 15 years, to reflect the specific architecture of one person's understanding of how information connected to other information, which was idiosyncratic, which was its strength, which was also the thing that made Asha occasionally and specifically terrifying. She was reading the Theological Review records for the 141st through the 183rd year of the Accord on a morning in late autumn when she found the first anomaly. It was small. It was the kind of small that required not only intimate familiarity with the specific document, but familiarity with the 27 documents adjacent to it, and the memory to hold all 28 in relationship simultaneously, and the particular instinct, not trained, she thought, or not only trained, but something that lived in the body as much as the mind, for when a pattern had a gap where there should be no gap. The gap was in a ruling. The Triune Faith's annual doctrinal review, year 168. The Leitzinger's order had submitted a theological argument regarding the nature of Solon's divine presence in the material world. Specifically, whether the so-called avatar moments that the Leitzingers described, the rare times when Solon's direct essence was said to briefly inhabit a living form and speak directly to the faithful, were literal, as the Leitzingers maintained, or metaphorical, as the Stonekeepers maintained. The ruling had found in the Stonekeepers' favor, which was in line with the general theological drift of the period and was unremarkable. What was remarkable, what was the gap, was the evidence the Leitzingers had submitted in support of their position. It was referenced in the ruling's preamble. It was the kind of evidence that would normally be preserved in full in the Dominion's archive. A theological claim of this significance, submitted to the formal review body, was required by the Accord's administrative provisions to be preserved in the Dominion's records, even if the ruling went against it. It was not in the archive. Not missing in the sense of damaged or misfiled. Missing in the sense of never having been here, a gap in the accession record, an entry that referenced a document that had no corresponding physical or scribal location, that had been logged as received and had then nothing. No preservation record. No disposal record, no transfer record. No record of what the Leitzingers had claimed Solon's avatar had said. Asha sat with this for a long moment. Then she went to the adjacent doctrinal review records. Year 141, year 150, year 159. She found 3 more gaps over the span of 40 years, all of them the same category. Lightsinger evidence regarding the Avatar's direct communications, submitted to formal review, logged as received, vanished. She sat with this for a considerably longer moment. Then she went to the records of the Triune Faith's internal governance. The Lightsinger's own reports to the Triune Council, the ones preserved in the Dominion's archive under the terms of the Accord, which required all 3 orders to provide the civil governments with copies of their governance records for the purpose of administrative transparency. She read them for 3 days. On the 4th day, she came to the office of Warden Commander Leth Valdric, her father's younger brother, the Dominion's senior military authority, and the one person in the administrative structure she trusted with something that was either the most significant discovery she had made in 15 years of archival work, or the kind of thing that, if you presented it to the wrong person, ended your career and possibly other things. And she put a single document in front of him and said, "I need a meeting with the Deepwood ambassador, today if possible, tomorrow at the latest." He looked at the document. He was a man who had spent 40 years in the military and had the kind of face that military work produced, marked by weather, stripped of easy expression, the kind of face that processed information before it showed any response to that information. He processed. "This is a Lightsinger theological record," he said. "Yes." "It references an internal document." "Yes." "A document that doesn't exist in our archive." "Correct." "And the pattern of missing documents, when you map it." "I mapped it," she said. She placed a second sheet beside the first. "It maps to a specific 40-year window. It maps to a specific category of content. And it maps, when you correlate it with the Lightsinger's personnel records for the same period, to a specific individual who held a specific role in the Order's evidence preservation chain." Leth was quiet for a moment. He looked at the map she had drawn, not a geographic map, but the document map, the web of connections and gaps and correlations that only made the specific shape it made when you had all 28 of the adjacent records in your head simultaneously. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "How long have you known about this?" 4 days, she said. "I need the Deepwood ambassador, Leth. The Lightsingers have a presence in Varenthal, and if they know I have found this." "They don't know yet." "No, but the individual whose name appears in the personnel records is currently in the city, for the autumn review convocation." She paused. "He is the current high cantor of the Lightsingers." Leth put both hands flat on the desk. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood. "The ambassador leaves for the Deepwood in 3 days," he said. "I will arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning." He paused. "And Asha, take the originals, take everything. Do not leave copies." She already had them under her arm. The Deepwood ambassador to the Valdric Dominion was not, technically, a diplomat. His name was Kaor, which in the Deepwood clan's original language meant something approximately equivalent to still water above a long drop, though the translation was contested, and the clan's linguists occasionally argued that the more accurate rendering was the quality of silence before significant action. Either way, his official title in the clan system was war speaker, not a diplomat, not a political envoy, but the individual designated by the clan council to speak on matters of conflict, negotiation, and strategic decision-making. That this function had come to look, over the 20 years Kaor had held the role. Almost exactly like diplomacy, was the kind of institutional drift that nobody had formally addressed, because the results were acceptable, and because addressing it would require admitting that the clan council had allowed its war speaker to become its most effective political instrument without anyone deciding to do so. He was 41 years old. He had the look of the Deepwood people, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with the particular coloring of the forest clans. Skin the warm brown of Old River stone, eyes that the Dominion people described as green, but were more accurately the color of deep forest shade, where multiple layers of canopy had filtered the light through so many iterations of itself that green and gold and brown had become one thing. He was not tall by Dominion standards, but was built with the density of someone who had spent 40 years in a forest that required constant physical negotiation roots to step over, branches to duck, undergrowth that pushed back. He had the specific quality of stillness that his name suggested. Asha had met him once before, briefly, at a formal review convocation 3 years ago. She remembered him with the precision she applied to everything. He had sat at the back of the room while the formal presentations were made, said nothing for 2 hours, and then asked one question that reorganized the entire subject of the presentation in a way that revealed 3 assumptions nobody had examined and 2 conclusions that were wrong. The room had been slightly stunned. He had gone back to sitting at the back. She had looked up his file that evening. She had been reading it in periodic increments ever since. He received her in the Dominion's 3rd-tier diplomatic quarter, the Deepwood ambassador's accommodation, which was functionally perfectly comfortable and was the 3rd tier because the Compact ambassadors were on the 1st tier and the allied city-state representatives were on the 2nd, and the Deepwood was neither a state in the Dominion's recognition framework nor a formal ally. He received her with the quality of someone who knew the meeting had been arranged by Warden Commander Asha Valdric and had drawn his own conclusions about the content before she arrived. He looked at her in the specific way he had looked at the presentation 3 years ago, not reading the surface, going below it. "You found something in the archive," he said, not a question. "Yes," she sat without waiting for the invitation, which he registered and did not comment on. "I need to tell you what I found, and I need you to tell me whether it matches anything in the Deepwood's own record. The Clan's Theological Archive." "The Clan's Theological Archive," he said, "is maintained by the Irth Bloodspeakers, and I am not an Irth." He paused. "But I have read it, most of it." He looked at her. "You have the document." She placed the original Lightsinger record on the table between them. Then the map. Then 11 additional documents in specific order, the order of the pattern's development, the sequence in which the gap became legible. He looked at them. He was quiet for a very long time. She let him be quiet because silence was information and because she had learned in 3 days of archival immersion that this specific pattern rewarded patience. "The missing evidence," he said at last. "Yes." The things the Lightsingers submitted to the Triune review body that were then removed from all official records. "Yes." They submitted accounts of what the Avatar said. His voice was very even. Solin's direct avatar, the rare manifestation of the god's actual essence in material form, and someone removed those accounts before they could be preserved. "Before they could be compared," she said. "Before anyone could compare what the Avatar said in year 141 to what the Avatar said in year 150, or year 168, or year 203. Before anyone could ask whether the pattern of the Avatar's communications over 40 years was consistent with a god speaking, or consistent with a god who was slowly losing the ability to speak at all. Kior looked at her. He looked at her with the same quality he had brought to the back of the room 3 years ago, and she had been reading in his file ever since. The quality of someone for whom information was not a performance but a structure, who assembled it carefully and tested the assembly before trusting it. "You think the Lightsingers have been covering the evidence of something happening to Solon," he said. "I think the High Cantor of the Lightsingers has been covering it," she said. "The records point to one individual in the evidence preservation chain, not to the order as a whole. The rest of the Lightsingers may not know. Or may not have been able to say anything about what they knew," he said quietly. She looked at him. "The Deepwood's Bloodspeakers," he said, "have been recording anomalies in the Triune Faith's divine channel for 31 years. Not in the Lightsingers specifically, in the broader theological landscape, the way the Deepwarden spirits respond to Triune rites that take place near the forest." He paused. "I have been carrying those records for 6 years, since I read the Bloodspeaker archive and understood what the pattern meant." His voice was steady. "I have not known who to bring them to." Asha looked at him across the table of documents. "What does the pattern in the Bloodspeaker records look like?" she said. Like something large is consuming the divine channel, he said. Slowly, over decades. Consuming it the way a slow fire consumes a building, not the dramatic collapse, but the internal supports going, one by one, until the building is standing only by habit and has been hollow for a long time. He paused. And the direction of the consumption follows the Lightsinger's territory, their sacred sites, their avatar manifestation locations. Something is eating Solon, she said. The plain language of it, stripped of all the theological hedging she had been applying for 3 days. Something has been eating Solon, he said, for 30 years, and whatever it is consuming may not stop at Solon. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, the city of Varanthal conducted its autumn business with the indifferent efficiency of a city that had been doing this for 300 years, and would continue doing it regardless of what was discussed in its third-tier diplomatic quarter. The High Cantor, Asha said, is in the city. He had known this before she arrived, she realized. He had been tracking this too. He leaves in 4 days for the Lightsinger's primary temple at Solanmere. If he knows, I have found the archive anomaly. He may already know. The Lightsingers have informants in the Dominion's administrative structure. It would be naive to assume otherwise. He was quiet for a moment. We need to go to the Wardenheart. The Deepwood's sacred center. Yes. The Deepwarden spirits can be reached there directly, not through rite or proxy, but through direct contact. If Solon's avatar has been compromised for 30 years, the Deepwardens will have felt it. They are old enough, and their connection to the Triune divine channel is lateral rather than hierarchical. They don't receive from the gods, they coexist with them. If anything in the divine structure has been damaged, the Deepwardens will know the shape of the damage. He paused. And they may know the source. The Wardenheart is... She calculated the distance. 16 days from Varanthal by the forest roads. 12 if we run the Deepwood paths. 8 if we push. Oui, she said. He looked at her steadily. You have the archive evidence. I have the Bloodspeaker records. The Wardenheart requires both. He paused. And you are not safe here. If the High Cantor's informants have reported the archive discovery. If they had, I'd likely be in a cell by now. She said it without the performance of bravery, as a plain assessment. The High Cantor's authority doesn't extend to the Dominion's civil administration. His authority, said Keor, extends to things that do not require formal authority to accomplish. You have found evidence that implicates the spiritual leader of one of the 3 Triune orders in a 30-year campaign of deliberate concealment of the state of the Divine Compact. The stakes of this are not political. They are theological and existential. People have been killed for less careful reasons than this. She looked at him. He looked back. 8 days, she said. 8 days, he agreed. She stood. She picked up the documents and placed them back in the case she had brought them in, which was sealed against water and fire, and had cost her more than a month's archival salary, and had seemed, 3 days ago, like an excessive precaution. It had stopped seeming excessive approximately 36 hours ago. I'll need a night to prepare, she said. I'll need to leave my catalogers something to work from, something that looks like normal work, that doesn't signal an absence. Can you trust your junior assistant? She thought of Sieve, 26 years old, ferociously organized, the best instinct for the archival system of anyone who wasn't a Shah. Yes, but I won't tell her what I found. The less she knows, the safer she is. Meet me at the east gate before sunrise, he said. I will have arranged the travel. She turned to go. Asha Valdric, he said. She stopped. The burning mark, he said. You have it, but you haven't activated it. She turned back to look at him. His face had the quality of someone asking a question they already knew was complicated. That is in my administrative file, she said carefully. Yes, he held her gaze. If we are going into the Deepwood with the High Cantor of the Lightsingers potentially in pursuit, if what we are carrying is what I believe it is, the mark may be necessary. The mark was given to me by the Dominion at 19 years old for military service, she said. I didn't activate it because I didn't serve in the military. I chose the archive instead. That choice was yours, he said. not dismissing it, not pressing it, simply acknowledging it. I am nodding the practical dimension for the journey ahead, not requesting that you revisit a decision. She looked at him for a moment. I'll consider it, she said, which was the same thing she had said in her own mind every year for 19 years. She went to prepare. The history of the burning mark was one of those histories that the Dominion taught in one version, and that the archive preserved in a different version, and that the Deepwood clans described in a third version that the other two had consistently refused to formally acknowledge. The Dominion's version. The burning mark was a divine gift, a manifestation of Vareth's blessing upon the Dominion's warriors, a sacred transformation that elevated those who received it into the full expression of what a Valdric soldier was meant to be. It made them faster, harder to kill, capable of the specific kind of endurance that turned ordinary soldiers into the warbond, the elite that had kept the Dominion intact for 300 years of border pressure from both the Triune Compact and the Deepwood clans. The mark was given at 19, after military assessment. It was activated by formal rite at first deployment. It was, as the Dominion taught it, the highest honor a Valdric could receive. The Archive's version. The burning mark was significantly older than the Dominion. It predated the Accord. It predated the Three Empire system. It appeared in records going back to the founding of the Triune Faith, in the earliest canticles, the ones that had not been revised or suppressed, as something that all three gods had a hand in, not Vareth alone. It had been, in the original theological framework, a transformation offered to any person of significant spiritual attunement who chose to undergo it. Not a military upgrade, but a deepening, a making more of what was already there, a specific alchemy of the divine, and the mortal that the Bloodweavers had maintained the rites for since the beginning. The Dominion had taken the rite, restricted the access, militarized the application, and rewritten the theology to make it exclusively theirs. This was not unusual. This was what empires did with powerful things they wanted exclusively. The Deepwood's version, the mark was Keth's work primarily. Keth, the god of living things, whose Bloodweaver order maintained the rites. The mark did not transform a person, it completed them. It revealed what was already present in their essential nature and gave it material form. A warrior marked became more fully what a warrior was. A healer marked became more fully what a healer was. An archivist marked. This was the version that Asha had found in the oldest records, the ones that existed in one copy in the Deepwood Bloodspeaker archive, and in a fragment she had found misfiled in the Dominion's own records 14 years ago. An archivist marked became more fully what an archivist was. Which meant, if the original theology was accurate, that Asha's mark would not make her a better fighter. It would make her better at what she already was, at reading patterns, at holding multiple information structures simultaneously, at understanding the connections between things that looked unconnected. It would make her, in the specific sense of the original transformation rite, more completely herself. This was why she had not activated it. Not because she feared the transformation, not because she objected to the rite, because the version offered to her at 19 had been the Dominion's version, the military version, the warrior upgrade, and she had stood in the activation chamber at 19 years old and looked at the rite and understood with the bone-deep clarity of someone who had been reading the archive since she was 12 that what was being offered was not what the original thing had been. And she had said no. The warband training officer who had overseen the ceremony had written in his report that she had refused due to physical cowardice, which was easier to record than the actual reason, and which had followed her file for 15 years as a footnote, a mild scandal, a thing that people occasionally brought up at formal functions when they wanted to see her reaction. She had spent 15 years not reacting. She thought about all of this in the pre-dawn dark of her apartment in Varenthal's administrative quarter, while she was packing the archive case and deciding what to take and what to leave and calculating the risk matrix of the next 8 days with the clean, systematic attention she applied to all problems that weren't, at their base, theological. The ones that were theological were harder. The theological problems were the ones where the archive's 3 versions were all simultaneously relevant, and you couldn't resolve them by finding the most accurate source, because the most accurate source was the one that the people in power had been systematically removing from the record for 40 years. She was, she thought, about to walk into the largest theological problem she had ever encountered, in the company of a man she had met twice and read about extensively, in a forest that was the oldest living thing on the continent, to consult with spirits who had been present since before the Triune faith had names for what they were. She packed the case. She added a second sealed inner compartment for the most critical documents. She put on the traveling clothes she had bought 11 years ago for a field survey that had never materialized, practical, dark, built for movement. And she looked at the small lacquered box on her desk that contained the dormant burning mark, a disc of divine-worked metal, the size of her palm, that had been sealed to her left hand's inner wrist at the ceremony when she was 19, and that had been sitting there ever since, doing nothing, waiting for a choice she hadn't made. She closed the box. She left it on the desk. Then she went back and put it in the archive case. She told herself this was preparedness. She was almost convinced. He was at the east gate before her, which she had expected. She arrived 20 minutes before sunrise, and he had been there. She could see the sign of patient waiting in the quality of his stillness, the specific stillness of someone who had settled into a position and expected to hold it for some time and was not perturbed by this, with 2 horses already prepared, carrying packs that had the compact efficiency of someone who knew forest travel intimately. He looked at her case without comment. She looked at his packs without comment. They mounted and rode for the east gate and through it and out onto the Dominion's eastern road in the last of the pre-dawn dark. They rode in silence for the first hour, which suited her. The silence was not awkward in the way of 2 people who did not know each other well enough to be comfortable with quiet. It was the functional silence of 2 people with enough separate thoughts requiring attention that speech would have been an interruption. She was reading the road, the movement on it, the quality of the military presence, whether anything about the Eastern Gate's patrol schedule had changed in ways that suggested the High Cantor's informants had moved faster than she had hoped. Nothing looked different. The patrol was normal. The gate guard had been casual in the way of guards performing a familiar routine, not in the way of guards performing a familiar routine while also watching for a specific person. Not yet, then. How long before they know I've left the city? She said. Kaor glanced at her. Your junior assistant. We'll discover the prepared work plan I left this morning and continue the routine cataloging. It is credible for approximately 3 days. She paused. After 3 days, the absence will be notable. Anyone looking will find that I left before sunrise with the Deepwood ambassador. 3 days, he said. We can be at the forest edge in 2.5 if we push the first day. Are you concerned about the pace? He looked at her with the quality that was becoming familiar, the below-the-surface look, the one that went below the question to the assessment beneath it. I am concerned about whether the archive's master has ever ridden for 12 hours at a stretch, he said. I am not a sedentary person, she said, which was true. The archive was underground, but it was large, and she had always navigated it on foot, and she ran the city's perimeter wall most mornings as an exercise in spatial thinking that she had explained to several confused colleagues as essential to archival methodology. But 12 hours is a data point I don't currently have. Then we will find out, he said, which was not reassuring but was accurate. They rode east. The city fell behind them. The Dominion's farmland spread to either side of the road, and it was good farmland, the specific fertility of land that had been managed carefully for 300 years, the kind of agricultural landscape that showed the history of its management in the quality of the soil and the pattern of the fields, and the particular way the drainage channels had been arranged to take advantage of the terrain's natural gradient. Asha read it automatically, the way she read everything, and the reading told her. This is a civilization that has been functioning well at the technical level. Whether it had been functioning well at any other level was a different question. The Deepwood clans, she said, after 2 hours. What is the current state of the internal politics? He didn't look surprised that she was asking. Complicated, he said. I know the formal structure. 7 clans, each with a designated clan speaker, coordinated by the full council, which requires four-clan agreement for any significant decision. But the Bloodspeaker records I've read suggest the coordination has been under strain. For 20 years, he said. The strain is specifically about the Empire question. 2 of the 7 clans, the Darath and the Kessin, have been in private negotiation with the Valdric Dominion. Not formal alliance, not the kind of agreement that would require council approval. Informal understandings about territorial access, resource exchange, what the Dominion would and wouldn't pursue in the forest margins. Does the full council know? The full council knows, and is pretending not to know, because formally acknowledging it would force the decision they have been avoiding for 20 years. Which is whether to formally ally with one of the empires or maintain independence. Independence is the Deepwood's foundational value, he said. It is the thing the clans agree on in the absence of agreement on anything else. The forest has been independent of the empire systems for the entire history of the Accord. The founding canticles specify the Deepwood as a sovereign territory under divine compact, not subject to any empire's governance. He paused. The Darath and Kessin clans have been arguing that the world has changed enough that the founding compact's provisions are no longer protective. That formal alliance with the Dominion would provide security the compact alone can no longer guarantee. And the other 5 clans? 3 maintain the independent position. 2 are undecided and therefore the political battleground. He paused. The Wardenheart's Council is traditionally sought for decisions of this magnitude. The Deepwardens have been consulted on major clan questions 4 times in the history of the Accord. Their council has always been unanimous and has always been followed. And if the Wardenheart shows signs of what the Bloodspeaker records suggest, that the divine channel is being compromised, then the question of whether to seek the Deepwardens' counsel becomes considerably more urgent and considerably more complicated, he said. If the channel is compromised, we cannot trust the council. If we cannot trust the council, we have no reliable mechanism for the kind of decision the clans are facing. His voice was even. Which is, I think, not accidental. She looked at him. You think the compromise of the divine channel and the destabilization of the Deepwood's internal politics are related. I think that destabilizing the Deepwood's governance at exactly the moment when both empires have reasons to want territorial access to the forest would be an extremely useful thing for certain parties. He paused. And I have been unable to prove the connection for 6 years. Because the evidence for the divine channel compromise was in a Lightsinger archive in Varenthal, she said. Yes. She thought about the 15 years she had spent building the archive's map of the world. About the specific, patient, incremental work of it, the way individual documents became meaningful only in relationship to other documents, the way the pattern only appeared when you had enough pieces and the right mental architecture for holding them in relation. She thought about the 6 years Kaor had been carrying the Bloodspeaker records, the 6 years of knowing something was wrong and lacking the piece that made the wrong thing legible. We should have found each other sooner, she said. He looked at her. The quality of the look was different from the analytical ones, warmer, briefly, the way a fire gives a brief, intense light when the wood shifts. Yes, he said. They rode east. The farmland gave way, gradually, to the transition zone, the band of territory between the Dominion's managed landscape and the Deepwood's proper edge, where cultivation had been tried and mostly abandoned, where the soil was good but the forest was persistent, where trees had grown back between the field furrows and the drainage channels had been colonized by the specific plants that preceded old growth and whose presence, the Deepwood Bloodspeakers said, meant the forest was reclaiming. It had the quality of a border that was not marked on any map, but was legible to anyone who knew how to read the land. The forest line, she said, as the afternoon light slanted through increasingly dense canopy. An hour to proper cover, he said. The border patrols rotate at the 4th hour of the afternoon. If we reach the cover before the rotation, we enter the forest on the natural patrol gap. You plan the timing. Yes. He glanced at her. We should eat before we reach the edge. The Deepwood paths are better run on a full stomach. She looked at him. You are occasionally almost domestic, she said. Something in his face, the brief quality that wasn't quite a smile, but occupied the space a smile might occupy in a less controlled face. I have been running the Deepwood for 20 years, he said. Certain lessons are too expensive to forget. She ate, they rode, and the forest took them in. The Deepwood at the forest edge was not the same as the Deepwood in its depths. She had known this intellectually. The archive contained extensive descriptions of the forest's various qualities at various depths. The Borderwood, as the Dominion's records called it, where the canopy was mixed and the old growth was interrupted by the long history of the Empire Forest margin. The Middlewood, where the old growth began to assert itself and the forest's particular sensory language became stronger. And the Deep Wood, where the oldest trees were, where the Deepwarden spirit's presence was felt not as a theological concept, but as a physical fact, a weight in the air, and a quality to the silence that the Bloodspeaker records attempted to describe, and that Asha had always assumed was either exaggeration or religious experience of a kind that didn't translate to paper. She understood, by the second night in the forest, that neither explanation was accurate. The Deepwood was alive in a way that was different from the way individual trees were alive. It was alive the way a mind was alive, as an integrated system of information processing, where every part received and transmitted, and the whole was something different from and greater than the sum of its parts. She felt it the way she felt the archive's patterns, not through any single document, but through the relationship between documents, the shape that the data made when you held enough of it at once. This was a disorienting way to experience a forest. It was also, she admitted to herself on the second night, extraordinary. They camped in the way Kayor ran everything, efficiently, specifically, with no action that wasn't functional and no waste that wasn't calculated. A fire small enough to provide warmth without providing significant visibility. A camp positioned under old growth where the canopy broke the fire's light before it could carry. Provisions that were nutritionally complete and logistically compact. She watched him build the camp while she tended to the horses, and she applied to the watching the same quality she applied to reading. The attention that went below the surface, that looked for the structure beneath the behavior. He moved through the forest with the ease of someone for whom it was home in the truest sense, not the performed ease of someone showing off their comfort, but the unconsidered ease of someone for whom the comfort was simply true. He handed her the tea when it was ready without asking if she wanted it. She accepted it and said, "Tell me about the Wardenheart." He sat across the fire, which was small enough that the space between them was the space of a conversation rather than the space of people sharing warmth. He looked at the fire for a moment before looking at her. "I have been to the Wardenheart 3 times, he said. "Once as a child, when my clan's blooding rite required a journey to the first Deepwarden site, not the heart itself, a satellite, but connected to it. Once at 22, when I was first assigned the War Speaker role, and the tradition required that a newly named War Speaker seek the Deepwarden's acknowledgement. And once 6 years ago, when I read the Bloodspeaker archive and understood what I was reading, and needed to understand whether the Deepwardens knew." "Did they?" "They knew something was wrong," he said. "They could not tell me what. The divine channel's compromise affected their communication as well. The part of their nature that is connected to the Triune's divine structure was already experiencing the interference. They gave me what they could." He paused. "They showed me the direction of the damage, which was north of the forest toward Solenmere." "The Lightsinger's primary temple," she said. "Yes." She held the tea and looked at the fire and thought about directions, about the way things pointed. The way evidence accumulated a direction, the way water accumulated in channels. The way 30 years of careful record erasure left a shape in the archive that pointed exactly where the Bloodspeaker's evidence pointed, toward the same place, toward the same individual. "The High Cantor of the Lightsingers," she said. "Vance Solenreath." She had used his name only once before in Leth's office, and saying it a second time had the quality of a decision becoming more real. "He has been in that role for 37 years. He was made High Cantor at 44. He is currently 81 years old." She paused. In any other position, a person of 81 would be in their final years of function. The Lightsinger's High Cantor is not an ordinary position. "No," Kaor agreed. The High Cantor's rights include a specific longevity provision. The position is said to confer an extended lifespan through Solin's blessing, which the canticles describe as genuine divine gift, she said, and which the original archive records, the ones that predate the accord, describe as, she paused, as a consequence of proximity to divine essence, not a gift given freely, a proximity effect. If a person stands close enough to a sufficient concentration of divine power for long enough. They absorb some of it, Kaor said. His voice had gone very still. They live longer, she said. They become, in certain measurable ways, more than ordinarily human. She paused. The question is where the divine essence is coming from. Silence. The fire made its small sounds. In the middle distance, the forest breathed not a sound exactly, but a quality of atmosphere, the deepwood doing its constant low-level information processing. The avatar manifestations, Kaor said. Every 40 years, approximately, the Lightsingers have recorded a full avatar manifestation, Solin's direct essence inhabiting a temporary material form. It is the highest theological event in their tradition. It is also, she paused, it is also the specific event category that appears in the archive anomalies, the events whose records were removed. If the avatar can be contacted, Kaor said slowly, if Solin's direct essence can be concentrated into a form, then someone with the right theological knowledge and the right rite could potentially harvest that essence, she said. Not take it by force. The god's essence in avatar form would resist direct extraction. But if you understood the avatar mechanism precisely enough, if you understood how the essence moved from the divine plane to material expression and back, she stopped. The Bloodweavers would know. The Bloodweavers are Keth's order, the god of living things, and their specific theological expertise is transformation, the movement of essence from one form to another, the alchemy of the divine and the material. If someone had access to Bloodweaver knowledge, or was working with a Bloodweaver, Kaor said. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire with the quality of someone following a line of reasoning to a destination that was not comfortable. The Bloodweavers have been quiet for 20 years, she said. In the archives record, they are the least documented of the three orders for the last 2 decades. Fewer publications, fewer formal presentations to the Triune review body, fewer, she stopped. Fewer evidence submissions. They were silenced, Kaor said, or they were complicit. Or both, she said. Both at different times at different levels of the order. The fire burned. The forest breathed. Neither of them spoke for a while, sitting with the shape of what was assembling between them. The shape of a 30-year campaign that had been invisible because it had been conducted at the specific intersection of 3 different information systems that did not normally talk to each other. The Dominion's archive and the Deepwood's Bloodspeaker records and the Triune Faith's internal theology. And that had required, to become legible, someone who had access to all 3. You said 6 years, she said eventually. He looked at her. You said you've been carrying the Bloodspeaker records for 6 years, waiting for someone to bring them too. She held his gaze. Why the Dominion ambassador post? If you knew the direction of the damage was north, toward Solinmere, toward the Lightsingers, why spend 6 years in the Dominion's diplomatic quarter rather than the Lightsingers' temple city? He was quiet for a moment. Because the Deepwood's political situation made me the most valuable intelligence asset in the forest, he said, without vanity. If I had gone to Solinmere, I would have been one foreign diplomat arriving at a hostile theological center with evidence of malfeasance. I would have been contained within hours. He paused. In Varenthal, I had access to the administrative records of the most powerful empire on the continent. I had relationships with the senior military and political figures. He paused again. I was waiting for the Dominion's archive to show me what I was missing. I was waiting for the person in Varenthal who could read the archive well enough to see the pattern. She looked at him steadily. You knew about me. I knew the archive's master had been in the position for 15 years and had been building something that didn't match any standard archival methodology. He met her eyes. I asked questions. People who know you were informative. A pause. The consensus was that you were either the most sophisticated information system the Dominion had ever accidentally built or slightly terrifying. Usually both. Who said terrifying? Several people, he said. All of them meant it admiringly. She felt, against her better judgment, the corner of her mouth want to do something. She disciplined it. So you were waiting for me to find the pattern. I was waiting for someone to find the pattern. I hoped it would be you. He paused, and the pausing had a quality she was beginning to recognize as his version of a more personal register. The slight slowing, the more deliberate choice of words. You have a particular way of seeing things. It is not subtle. It is not soft. But it is, he stopped. Complete, she said. Because that was what the archive had always been about. Not individual documents, but the whole thing, the complete map, the version of the world that included the gaps. Yes, he said, and the firelight was warm on his face, and he looked at her in the way that was not the analytical look or the strategic look, but something quieter and more direct. She decided to be practical. We should sleep. 8 days is an optimistic timeline, and tomorrow will be the hardest day of the run. Yes, he said again, and turned to arrange his bedroll with the same efficiency he applied to everything. She arranged hers and lay looking up at the canopy, the old-growth trees enormous above them, the stars visible through their gaps in the specific way the Deepwood arranged stars, framed and particular, and thought about 30 years of careful erasure and the specific shape of a world that had been slowly hollowed out by a man who was now 81 years old and had extended his life by standing close to a dying god. She slept eventually. The forest breathed around her. In the deep channels of her dormant burning mark, the lacquered box against her wrist, something that had been still for 19 years, shifted slightly, the way coals shift in a fire that has not been fed and is beginning to consider going out. On the 4th day in the forest, they were found. Not found in the threatening sense, found in the sense of encountered, deliberately, by people who had known where they were for at least 2 days and had been choosing the right moment. A war speaker's movements in the Deepwood were not invisible to the clans, and a war speaker traveling with an unknown Dominion woman was the kind of anomaly that reached the nearest clan post within hours of entering the forest. The Darath were the clan whose territory encompassed the forest's northeastern quadrant, which was the quadrant through which the most direct route to the Wardenheart ran. They were also one of the 2 clans in informal negotiation with the Dominion, which made their interest in an off-schedule war speaker transit, accompanied by a senior Dominion official, both entirely understandable and specifically complicated. Their representative was a woman named Sarath Darath, the clan's designated border speaker, the equivalent of a customs official in a system that had no formal customs, who arrived at their 4th morning camp with 5 forest runners in wolf-quiet attendance and the expression of someone who had prepared several versions of this conversation and had not yet determined which one was appropriate. Kior received her with the specific formality of the war speaker: roll the minimal bow, the open hand gesture, the specific phrase of the forest greeting that acknowledged Darath territory and the speaker's authority within it. Asha stood at his shoulder and was still in the way she had learned, in 4 days of forest travel, was the correct response to forest encounters. Not aggressive stillness, not performative relaxation, but the specific quality of someone who was present and paying attention and making no claims on the space. War speaker, Sarath said. Her voice was neutral in the careful way of someone being professionally neutral. The Wardenheart route. Yes, Kaor said. The full council has not been convened for the blessing of passage. This was not an accusation. It was the statement of a procedural anomaly, waiting for explanation. The matter I am carrying to the Wardenheart is time-sensitive, Kaor said. It will be brought to the full council after the Wardenheart consultation. Sarath looked at Asha, not with hostility with the reading quality, the assessment. A Dominion archive keeper, she said. The archive's master, Kaor said, carrying evidence relevant to the divine channel's current state. Something moved in Sarath's face. A controlled movement. She had the clan's characteristic expressional economy, but it was there. Concern, the specific concern of someone who had heard something they had been half expecting to hear. "The divine channel," she said, "has been compromised," Kaor said. "For 30 years. The evidence is in the Dominion's archive and the Deepwood's Bloodspeaker records. The source appears to be in the Lightsinger's structure." He paused. "The High Cantor of the Lightsingers may be aware that this evidence has been consolidated. If he is, we have limited time before intervention." Sarath was quiet for a long moment. Around her, the 5 forest runners made no sound. "The Darath have noticed changes at the eastern Deepwarden site," she said, finally. "Over the past 8 months, the site's communion quality has been degrading." She paused. "We brought it to the council. Kessin said it was seasonal variation. Darath accepted that assessment because we did not have evidence to the contrary." Another pause. "How far does the compromise go?" "That is what we need the Wardenheart to show us," Kaor said. "And we need to reach it before the High Cantor reaches it." "The High Cantor," Sarath said, "does not have permission to enter the Deepwood." She said it with the flat certainty of a rule that had never been violated. "He has never needed to enter the Deepwood directly," Asha said, her first contribution to the conversation, delivered with the same calm she used for presenting evidence in the archive. "If he has been conducting the extraction remotely, through the avatar mechanism at Solenmere, then the Wardenheart's corruption is the consequence of an action that happens outside the forest. He does not need to come here to complete what he has been doing." She paused. "He needs to come here only if he has lost control of the mechanism. If something is changing that requires direct action." Sarath looked at her. The reading quality was deeper now. "What makes you say the mechanism may be changing?" "The Deepwarden site degradation you described," Asha said. "If the extraction has been running at a controlled rate for 30 years and has recently begun producing visible degradation at peripheral sites, then the extraction rate has increased. Something changed 8 months ago." She paused. "The last Lightsinger avatar manifestation, the most recent one on record, was 9 months ago." Silence. "You think the most recent avatar manifestation was different," Kaor said. He was looking at her with the quality that meant he was following a line of reasoning toward a destination she had arrived at before him. "I think the most recent avatar manifestation was not the beginning of a new manifestation cycle," she said. "I think it was the end of the old one. I think what appeared 9 months ago was not Solin's essence entering a new avatar. It was Solin's essence making a final attempt at coherence before being fully consumed. A last contact." She paused. "The Avatar's final communication with the faithful, whose record was presumably also removed by the High Cantor, would have been Solin's last independent act." She looked at the fire. "And if Solin is now fully consumed, then the High Cantor has been running on 30 years of accumulated divine essence," Kaor said. "And now the supply has ended, and he is dying," Asha said, "or trying to find a new source." She met Kaor's eyes. "The Deepwarden spirits are the most concentrated repository of divine essence on the continent that is not under direct Lightsinger control, if he has already consumed Solin." "He will come for the Deepwardens," Kaor said. Sarath Darath was very still. "How long," she said, "do we have?" "Days at most," Asha said, "possibly less." Sarath looked at the forest, not the particular trees around the camp, but something in a larger direction, the specific look of someone attending to a connection that was not visual. When she looked back, her face had made a decision. "I will send runners to the other clan speakers," she said. "The emergency council provision. It requires only 3 clans to authorize emergency passage and the convocation of a war council." She paused. "The Darath supports your passage and requests your presence at the war council at the Wardenheart." "You're convening a war council at the Wardenheart," Kaor said. "If the Wardenheart is the target, the war council must be convened at the target," Sarath said, with the specific practical logic of the clan's military tradition. "The Deepwardens cannot be defended from a distance." She paused. "How long until the High Cantor can move?" "We don't know his current position," Asha said. "But if his informants in Varenthal reported the archive discovery within the last 48 hours, then he is already moving," Kaor said. "Then we run," Sarath said, and the forest runners around her shifted without a word into the compact, purposeful readiness of people who had been waiting for exactly this instruction. They ran, not in the loose, exploratory way of the first day's travel. This was running with intention, the kind that consumed the forest in long miles and left no attention for anything except the pace and the path and the steady management of energy across distances that would have seemed impossible in the Dominion's open farmland, but that the forest's paths, maintained by generations of clan runners, made achievable. Asha had said she was not sedentary, and she was not. But she was not a forest runner, and by the end of the first pushed day, she was running on the specific deep resource of stubbornness rather than physical ease. She ran because stopping was not a viable option, and because the war speaker in front of her had not slowed or looked back more than twice, and because she had been building the archive's map of the world for 15 years and had not done it to stop short of the place where the map became real. Kior's pace checks were brief and practiced. He did not ask if she was all right. He offered water at the intervals the forest training recommended, and a specific nut-and dried fruit combination at the energy intervals. And once, when the path crossed a stream and she stopped to splash cold water on her face without ceremony, he waited at the stream edge without comment for the 30 seconds it took her to recover and continue. This was not solicitude. It was the precise management of a mission's most variable factor, applied without ego. She found it, perversely, more reassuring than solicitude would have been. On the second pushed day, they found the High Cantor's advance force. Not the High Cantor himself. She would understand later that Vance Solenreath was too careful, too patient, too invested in the long, careful game of 30 years to be anywhere near the front of this particular action. What he sent was a team of 8 Lightsinger Priests Marshal, the Order's combat wing, who wore the light silver of Solin's color, and who were not simply spiritual functionaries, but were the most heavily trained combat unit in the Triune Faith's organizational structure. The Triune Faith was not supposed to have armies. The Accord specified that the Order's combat wings were for the protection of sacred sites and personnel, not for offensive operations. This was the letter of the Accord. The spirit had been progressively hollowed, over 30 years, by a High Cantor who understood the gap between letter and spirit and had been operating in it with considerable effectiveness. The 8 Priests Marshal were at the Voral Pass, the narrow rock corridor that was the most direct route from the forest's eastern edge to the Wardenhart's approaches, a natural bottleneck that the clan maps marked as the only viable rapid transit route for a group of their size. They were waiting, which meant either the High Cantor's informants were faster than Asha had calculated, or someone in the Deepwoods border posts had passed the route information. She filed both possibilities and focused on the immediate problem. Kior stopped them at the pass approach, the natural sight break, a fold in the rock where the path curved and the pass wasn't yet visible, and was very still for a moment. Then he looked back at her with the level quality that meant he had assessed the situation and had organized a response and was communicating the parameters. 8, he said quietly. You can hear them. The forest can hear them, he said, which was the war speaker's way of saying something she would need more time in the Deepwood to fully understand, but that was, based on the blood speaker records she had studied, genuinely accurate. That a trained Deepwood operative with sufficient connection to the forest's information network could receive the forest's sensory data the way a skilled archivist received a pattern in documents. The Dareth runners, she said. 2 days behind us, they went to the other clan speakers first. He paused. It is us and 8 Lightsinger combat trained. The odds, she said, are not in our favor by the numbers, he said. They will be worse if they have time to organize a containment. He looked at her. Can you run the north face of the pass? She looked at the rock above the path. The north face was steep, not vertical, with the specific quality of rock that offered handholds but required commitment. You could climb it, but you couldn't climb it and do anything else simultaneously. What do I do when I reach the far end? There is a position above the pass's exit point, he said. The rock formation the clan maps call the hammer. If you are at the hammer when I drive them through, you have the elevation advantage for the archive case. She looked at the case on her back, then she looked at him. The archive case is not a weapon. No, he said, but what is in it is the most valuable thing on this path, and if I am fighting 8 priests martial in a narrow pass, I cannot also protect it, and I need to know it is above the fight rather than in it. He held her gaze. You are not fighting the pass battle. You are preserving the evidence that makes the Wardenheart consultation meaningful. She understood this. She also understood that he was right and that the understanding did not require any performance of acceptance on her part. How long do you need? Enough time for you to reach the hammer. He looked at the rock face. 12 minutes. Can you do the north face in 12 minutes? She looked at the north face. 10, she said. Give me 10 and I'll be at the hammer before you start. Something in his face, the brief quality. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing to it that she had yet seen. 8, he said, which was a negotiation and a statement of confidence simultaneously. She went. She climbed the north face in 9 minutes and 30 seconds, not that anyone was counting, moving with the specific focused efficiency of someone who had decided to be successful at something and was allocating all available resources to that end. The archive case was awkward on the upper sections, but manageable. She had carried heavier things in the sublevels. From the hammer position, she could see the pass. She saw what followed, and filed it in the part of her mind that stored significant things, because it was significant, and because the archive in her head did not distinguish between data types based on comfort. Keor moved through 8 Lightsinger priests martial in a narrow mountain pass, with the specific quality she had been reading about in the Bloodspeaker records for 6 years, and had not quite believed until this moment. The quality that the Deepwood Warriors' training produced in those who had fully integrated it, which was not the graceful combat dance of the Warbon's performance style, not the aggressive power of the Dominion's military tradition, but something that was more like the forest itself, patient, specific, using the opponent's own force rather than countering it, the way the forest used wind rather than fighting it. He was fast, but the speed was less visible than the precision, each movement placed with the surgical economy of someone for whom unnecessary motion was a kind of waste, the same economy he applied to camp building and pace management and conversation. He was injured in it. She saw the moment the 4th exchange, the priest marshal who had been positioning behind the main engagement, and struck from a range and angle that Keor's attention had been legitimately occupied in managing. The cut was along his left forearm, significant enough to bleed freely. He absorbed it into the next movement without pause, using the arm's reduced function as information about what it could and couldn't do next. The pass fight lasted 11 minutes. 8 priests martial. 2 were down in the first 3 minutes, incapacitated rather than killed. The Deepwood's combat tradition drew a sharp distinction between disabling and killing, because the forest's ethic held that every life in the forest was the forest's life, and killing unnecessarily was a debt against the whole. 3 more were down by the 6th minute. The remaining 3, reading the trajectory of the engagement, made a decision that was professionally correct. They retreated eastward, back the way they had come. Keor let them go. He stood in the pass with the breathing of someone who had been running hard and fought harder, and he looked up at the hammer position, and she climbed down. She arrived at the pass floor and looked at the arm without asking permission, because the arm was a functional problem, and functional problems did not require social negotiation. The cut was deep enough to need binding and would benefit from cleaning. She opened the archive case, which was not an archive case at that moment, but the container of all available supplies, and found the medical kit she had packed specifically, because she had decided from the first morning that this kind of journey was the kind that required a medical kit. He held the arm out with the same quality he brought to every practical requirement. She cleaned and bound the wound with efficiency, and his face during this process was the face of someone paying attention to other things while a necessary physical maintenance task was being performed. 3 escaped, she said. Yes, they will reach the High Cantor's main party and report. He tested the bound arm, flexing the hand. We have less time than we had before the pass. How far to the Wardenheart? 2 days at a sustainable pace, 1.5 if we push. Then we push, she said, and handed him the water. He drank and looked at her over the rim of the vessel. With the quality that she had been filing in the place she put things, she was not ready to examine. "The north face in 9 minutes," he said. "The hammer was further from the exit point than your description suggested," she said. "Otherwise it would have been 8. He handed back the water, with the ghost of the not-quite smile. They moved. The Deepwood was the oldest place Asha had ever been. She had been in Varenthal's sublevels, where the archive occupied the oldest construction in the Dominion's administrative complex, where the walls were pre-accord stonework, and the air had the quality of stone that had been maintaining its current temperature for several centuries. She had been in the Triune Faith's original temple complex outside Varenthal, the one that predated the current institutional structures, and that the Accord's founding documents had specified as a neutral sacred ground. A building so old that its architectural style no longer matched any known tradition, which the archive's records attributed to the pre-Accord civilization, and which Asha had always found useful as a reminder that the current arrangements of power were not the only arrangements of power that the world had ever contained. The Deepwood was older than any of that. Not in the way of geological age, though it was that too. The trees in the Deepwood had been growing for longer than the Dominion had existed, and their roots went down to the deep rock, and the deep water and the specific deep silence that the Bloodspeaker records described as the forest's memory, the accumulated record of everything the forest had witnessed and processed and kept. Not geological age, the other kind. The kind that lived in the quality of the silence, the way the light came through the canopy, the way the air felt against skin that was accustomed to the Dominion's managed farmland and city stone. The air felt like being thought about. She said this to Keor on the second night of the Deepwood run, which was a sentence she would not normally have said aloud, because it was not the kind of sentence that survived the transition from internal to external without losing something. But she was tired in a way that loosened the usual management, and the forest's quality at that depth was doing something to her that the archive reader's precision wasn't fully insulating her from. Keor looked at her from across the small fire with the specific quality of someone receiving information they had been waiting for. "Yes," he said, "the Deepwardens are aware of you." She looked at him. Not in the sense of a directed attention. The Deepwarden's awareness is not like that. It is more diffuse. But you are in the forest's range, you are carrying something the forest recognizes, and the forest is, he paused. Responding is the wrong word, acknowledging. What does the forest recognize? He looked at her steadily. "The dormant mark," he said. "The Deepwardens know Keth's work. They are coeval with Keth's creation. They are older than the Triune Faith's formal theology, older than the 3 orders, older than the doctrinal arguments about which God did what. They know the original shape of the divine transformation, before it was militarized or restricted or rewritten." He paused. "They recognize you." She looked at the lacquered box against her wrist. The disc of divine-worked metal, dormant for 19 years, that had shifted in its quiescent state on the first night in the forest, and had been doing something ever since that was not quite sensation, and was not quite nothing. A low, persistent quality, like a word she had been trying to remember, like the feeling of knowing a pattern was there before she could see its shape. "The original theology," she said. "Yes." "The archive version," she said, not a question. "Yes." He held her gaze with something in it that was warmer than the analytical quality, the specific warmth of someone who has been watching something resolve and is glad of the resolution. "The burning mark in the original sense, not the warrior's rite, Keth's original transformation." He paused. "An archivist marked becomes more fully what an archivist is." She looked at the forest, at the old-growth canopy and the roots that went down to the deep rock, and the specific quality of the light that was not quite light, coming through layers of green that were older than doctrine. "The mark responds to the forest because the forest recognizes its potential," she said. "Not what it is, what it could be." "Yes." "And if I activate it here," she said, "in the Deepwood near the Warden Heart, the activation is complete and true in a way that the Dominion's rite is not," he said. "Because the Dominion's rite is the militarized version. It channels the transformation in a specific direction, toward combat function. Here, in the forest, with the Deepwardens acknowledging the original form, he paused. The transformation completes in the direction of your actual nature. She looked at him. You have been an archivist for 15 years, he said. You have built the most comprehensive information map of the world that has ever existed, in a medium that has never been attempted before, and you have been doing it with a dormant enhancement that has been sitting in your wrist waiting to make you fully what you are. He held her gaze. Imagine what the archive is when you can read it the way the forest reads itself. She sat with this. The fire was small and warm. The forest breathed around them with its constant, ancient attention. If I activate the mark here, she said, I am not activating the Dominion's right. I am activating Keth's original transformation, which the Dominion has never sanctioned. No. The Dominion will have questions. Many, he agreed. Most of them solvable if we return with what the Warden Heart shows us and stop the breaking. He paused. The unsolvable version of the Dominion's questions is the version where we arrive at the Warden Heart without the means to protect what we carry, and the High Cantor gets there first. She looked at the lacquered box. She thought about 19. She thought about the activation chamber and the officer who had written physical cowardice in the report and the 15 years of the footnote. She thought about the thing the original theology said, completion in the direction of actual nature. She thought about the archive, about the 15 years of building the most honest map of the world that had ever existed, with a dormant enhancement sitting in her wrist, making it slightly less than what it could be. She opened the lacquered box. The disc was warm. It had been warm since the first night in the forest, which she had attributed to body heat, and had known, with the honesty she applied to things when she was not performing for anyone, was not body heat. She pressed it to her inner wrist. The metal, which had been sealed to her skin since she was 19, seated itself with the precision of a key in the right lock. She felt it begin. It was not dramatic. This was perhaps the most significant thing about it, the utter absence of drama. The way the original theology's transformation worked differently from the Warbone's violent marking, differently from the combat-grade heat and fire that the Dominion's right produced in military activations. The Dominion's mark in activation had been described to her by every Warbone she had spoken to as an experience of tremendous force, of something expanding in the chest and burning along the limbs, of the world becoming sharper and more vivid and more available to the body's power. What she felt was more herself. Not more powerful in the sense of force, more thorough. The pattern reading that she had been doing for 15 years, the ability to hold multiple information structures simultaneously, to feel the connections between seemingly unrelated data points, to perceive the shape of a pattern before it was fully visible, that capacity expanded, not upward but outward, became fuller and more complete. Like a lens that had always been slightly out of focus, making the precise adjustment. The forest was extraordinary. She could see, not with her eyes, with the pattern sense, the newly complete archival faculty, the forest's information network, the way the Bloodspeaker records had described it, but that she had not been able to fully grasp from description alone. The deep roots carrying information between the old-growth trees. The Deepwarden presence, which was not a single location but a distributed consciousness, present throughout the forest and concentrated at the heart. Not a consciousness exactly. The word was too simple, but something that processed and responded and remembered in the way a consciousness did, at a scale that made the archive's 15 years of records seem like a single document. And beneath that, this was the thing she had not expected, the thing that made her still for a long moment while Kaor watched and said nothing. Beneath the forest's information network, she could feel the damage. Not as a metaphor. As a structural reality, the way you feel a flaw in a building's support by the way the floor responds when you walk over it. The divine channel that ran through the forest, the connection between the Deepwarden spirits and the triune divine structure, the lateral relationship that Kaor had described, was damaged. Specifically, directionally, in the way the Bloodspeaker records had described, but that no description had made fully concrete until this moment. And she could see the direction of the damage, with a precision that the Bloodspeaker records hadn't captured. Kayor, she said. He was watching her with the focused attention of someone witnessing something significant. The damage to the divine channel, she said. The direction is not simply north, toward Solenmere. It is more specific than that. She held the pattern in her mind, the damaged threads of the forest's divine connection, running outward from a source point that was not Solenmere. The source is not the Lightsinger's primary temple. He was very still. Then where? She looked at the pattern. At the 30-year accumulation of damage, viewed from the inside of the affected system for the first time, with the faculty that could see it properly. Source is here, she said. In the forest. She looked at him. The High Cantor does not need to come to the Deepwood because he is already here. He has been here in a specific sense for 30 years. She paused, working through the pattern. The avatar mechanism, the way Solin's essence moved into material form for the manifestations. He understood it well enough to create a parallel channel. Not at Solenmere. Here in the forest, where the Deepwarden presence amplifies and sustains divine essence. She looked at the ground, at the root network below the soil, the information-carrying structure of the old growth. He used the forest's own amplification capacity. The Deepwarden spirits have been, without knowing it, conducting the extraction for him. The connection between Solin's essence and the Deepwarden's divine channel meant that every time the forest amplified the divine signal in its natural function. It amplified the extraction, Kayor said. Yes, she met his eyes. The forest has been the mechanism. The Deepwardens have been the mechanism. They didn't know. They couldn't know because the channel damage affected their awareness the way it affected everything else in the divine network. They were both the tool and the thing being used, and the same damage that made them the tool prevented them from perceiving it. Until now, he said. Until someone came into the forest with the full pattern sense active, she said. Until someone could read the forest the way the forest reads itself and see the shape of what has been happening in it. He looked at her for a long moment. His face had the quality it had had in the past, the directness, the assessment stripped of everything that wasn't necessary. Can you see the extraction mechanism, its location, its structure? She looked at the pattern again. Yes, she said, and I can see what it needs to continue. The Deepwardens. Yes, if the Deepwardens are destroyed, if the War Council, the High Cantor, presumably wants to provoke results in a conflict that damages the forest's divine infrastructure. The extraction mechanism collapses, he said. Taking whatever accumulated essence he has stored with it, he loses everything. He paused. Unless he can absorb the Deepwarden's essence before the collapse, she said. Which would require the Warden Heart to be accessible for the forest's central processing point, its highest density divine concentration, to be open and undefended at the moment he chooses to act. Which requires the Warden Heart to be undefended, he said. Which requires the War Council to be called away from the heart to respond to a threat at the perimeter. They looked at each other. The priests marshal at the Voral Pass, she said. They were not trying to stop us. No, he said. They were visible, deliberately placed to be found, fought, pursued, to produce exactly the response we had. Sarath Dareth sending runners to the other clans, the emergency war council being convened at the Warden Heart. And then being called to the perimeter when the main force arrives, she said, leaving the heart itself. Temporarily undefended, he said, for exactly the window he needs. The forest breathed around them. In the distance, she could feel it now, through the completed pattern sense, the new faculty reading the forest's information network, the approach of something large and organized that was not the Darath runners and was not the other clan speakers. The High Cantor's main force was in the forest. How far, Kayor said. He had felt it too, not through the new faculty, through 20 years of forest training. 2 hours, she said, maybe less. He stood, she stood. The fire had already been banked, the camp already organized for rapid departure, because Kayor always organized a camp for rapid departure. The Warden Heart is 6 hours from here, he said. The War Council's clan speakers are 4 hours behind us. If we run, she said. If we run, he looked at her. The arm was bound and the blood had not come through the binding. The forest was reading their position and would begin doing something that the Bloodspeaker records described as routing, the forest's active participation in guiding its people through the correct paths under threat. The burning mark, he said, not a question, an acknowledgement of what had changed. Will make me faster, she said. Not combat fast, comprehension fast. I can read the forest's routing signal directly now. She paused. Tell me what the War Council's role should be. The War Council is the clan's highest military decision body, he said. It requires 6 of the 7 clan speakers. In my war speaker capacity, I convene and direct it. He paused. It has never been convened against a target that was also inside the forest. Everything about this situation is unprecedented, she said. Yes, he said, and his voice had the quality of someone who had been waiting for the unprecedented and was not afraid of it and was very glad of the company. She felt the forest's routing signal pulse through the pattern sense, a direction, a specific path, the oldest route to the heart. This way, she said. And she ran, and the forest ran with her, and Kaor was at her shoulder, and the night was 6 hours old, and the Warden Heart was 6 hours ahead, and between them and it was everything that had been building for 30 years. The forest knows 2 things about fire: that it destroys carelessly and creates carefully, and that the distinction between them is the single most important question in the long argument between living things. From the Deepwood Bloodspeaker records, Irth Clan Archive, attributed to the Deepwarden known as the Ruteldest. Date, approximately year 40 of the Accord, possibly earlier. Running in the Deepwood at night, in the deep old-growth forest, was an experience that Asha would not have been capable of 48 hours earlier. Not the physical act, the path sense, the routing signal that the forest provided. The way the completed mark now let her receive the forest's information directly rather than inferring it from the Bloodspeaker records' descriptions. The forest at night was not dark in the way city streets were dark, where darkness meant the absence of human-made light. The forest at night had its own luminosity. The phosphorescent fungi that grew on old deadfall, the specific silver that accumulated on old leaves, the way the canopy, even lightless, was a presence that organized the space beneath it, channeling air and sound and the forest's own subtle signaling into an information environment that the completed mark processed as naturally as breathing. She ran with Kaor at her right shoulder, which was where he had been since the Voral Pass, and she was aware of him not with the fragmented awareness of someone tracking an external factor, but with the kind of integrated awareness that the completed mark made possible, the quality of knowing where he was the way she knew where she was, a continuous peripheral certainty that was not distracting but grounding. They did not speak while they ran. Speech required processing resources that both of them needed elsewhere. She was reading the forest's routing signal, tracking the approach of the High Cantor's main force through the pattern sense, calculating the rate of divergence between their progress and the approaching threat. He was reading the forest through his 20 years of integration, receiving whatever the forest communicated to someone who had been running it long enough to become fluent. In the second hour of the run, he touched her arm. She slowed without stopping, a reduction of pace that allowed the conversation. He was looking northeast, which was off the routing path. Kessin runners, he said very quietly. The Kessin were one of the 2 clans in informal negotiation with the Dominion. She assessed the implications in the time it took to register them. They know the routing signal will bring us here. Yes, and they know the approach of the High Cantor's force. They may have facilitated it. The informal arrangement with the Dominion, he paused. The Dominion and the Lightsingers are not in formal alliance, but if the Kessin clan's arrangement with the Dominion became an arrangement with the Lightsingers, through the kind of intermediary relationship that is never written down. They sold the route, she said. Possibly. He was still looking northeast. The Kessin runners are paralleling our course, not intercepting paralleling. They are either tracking our position to report it or Sarath Darath's emergency council request reached them, she said. And they are responding, and they are paralleling because they don't know whether to approach directly. He looked at her. The Kessin clan speaker is named Thresh, she said. She had read the Blood Speaker records extensively, which included clan political intelligence going back 60 years. He was appointed 3 years ago after the previous speaker's sudden death. His appointment was unusual. He came from the Kessin's secondary branch, not the primary succession line. He is the one who formalized the informal arrangement with the Dominion. She paused. His predecessor was the one who brought the first evidence of divine channel anomaly to the full council and was dismissed. Kior went very still. The previous Kessin clan speaker, she said, was the Blood Speaker who first documented the divine channel damage, 23 years ago. He brought the evidence to the council and was dismissed as overreading the data. 2 months later, he was dead. A forest accident, the kind of thing that happens, that is individually unremarkable and collectively. Part of the pattern, Kior said. Yes. And the current Kessin clan speaker is an artifact of that death. His appointment required the Kessin's secondary branch's emergency succession procedure, she said, which is legal and which was completed correctly. But the death that triggered it, she looked northeast. The Kessin who are running parallel to us, they are responding to Sarath's emergency request. They don't know about Thresh's history. The secondary Kessin branch does not have full access to the clan's historical archive. They're coming to the War Council, he said. They're coming to the War Council because Sarath invoked the emergency provision, and the Kessin blood loyalties go deeper than any individual clan speaker's political arrangements, she said. The question is whether Thresh arrives at the War Council before or after them. He looked at her. How do you want to handle the War Council? The question arrived with a quality she was beginning to recognize, the specific quality of someone who held significant authority and was distributing it with deliberate intention, not because they lacked confidence in their own judgment, but because they recognized that her judgment in this domain was better. The War Council was his formal authority. The political intelligence of the clan speaker's relationships was hers. The War Council is yours, she said, but the Kessin evidence, Thresh's succession, and the previous speaker's death needs to be available before the council makes any strategic decision that requires Kessin agreement. She paused. Can you delay the formal convocation until all 6 required speakers are present? The convocation requires 5 of 7. Dareth has already committed. If 5 arrive before Thresh, the council can begin without him. Then we need to be at the heart before Thresh, she said. He'll try to reach it first, not for the council, for the High Cantor's purpose. If the perimeter threat strategy requires the War Council to be called away from the heart, someone at the heart needs to give the false signal. Someone who has access and credibility. Thresh, he said. Thresh. Then we run faster than a Kessin clan speaker, who knows the forest paths and has a head start. Yes, she said. He looked at her with the direct quality. Your assessment of the situation is complete enough to act on, she said. We can refine it once we're at the heart. Yes, he said, and they ran faster. The Warden Heart was not a building. She had known this from the Bloodspeaker records, had known it intellectually the way you know things that have been described in text rather than experienced in person. But the gap between the description and the reality was the same gap she had encountered throughout the Deepwood. The gap between the map and the territory, between the archive's record of a thing and the thing itself, which the completed mark had been collapsing all night in a series of small recalibrations of her understanding of what the world was. The Warden Heart was a clearing in the old growth. The oldest old growth in the Deepwood, trees that the Bloodspeaker records estimated at between 2,000 and 4,000 years, which the Forest's information network confirmed were at the extreme end of what organic life in this kind of climate could achieve without divine assistance, and which were, she understood now through the pattern sense, partially divine themselves. Not trees that had been touched by the gods in the way of the Triune Faith's sacred sites. Trees that had grown in such close proximity to the Deepwarden presence for so long that the distinction between organic forest and divine entity had become gradual rather than absolute. The clearing was approximately 50 yards across, roughly circular, and the floor of it was not the forest floor of roots and soil and fallen leaves, but something older and smoother, stone that the roots had grown around and over and through for centuries, old growth occupying the cracks and the seams, until the stone and the roots were a single surface, neither entirely one nor the other. In the center was the heart itself. It was a pool. Not water, the fluid in it was darker and thicker than water, with a luminescence that was not bioluminescence and was not reflected light, but something that came from within the fluid itself, the specific quality of concentrated divine essence, which the blood speaker records had described, and which the completed mark now let her see precisely for what it was. Divine essence, not metaphorical, not theological. The actual fundamental substance of what gods were made of the same substance that the triune faith's three orders managed and channeled and organized, and occasionally argued about present here, in a concentration that made the secondary deepward insights she had felt through the forest's network feel like candle flames compared to a furnace. And she could see, with the pattern sense's full precision, what 30 years of extraction had done to it. The damage was she had been using the word damage for days, since the archive and the blood speaker records and the pass and the root, and she had understood damage as a concept. Seeing it directly in the heart's divine fluid was something else. The fluid in the pool was diminished, not in volume. The pool was full, but in concentration. The luminescence was wrong, not absent, but thin. The specific quality of thinness that appeared in a person's face after a long illness, when the essential vitality was still present, but not generously, not wastefully, but carefully, with the quality of something being hoarded rather than given freely. Solon's essence, extracted over 30 years, had reduced the heart's divine concentration to approximately. She ran the pattern, 40% of its original state. The deepward spirits were present. She felt them before she saw any expression of them, felt them the way you feel an extremely large, extremely old, extremely patient presence that has been aware of your approach for longer than you have been aware of theirs. The forest's information network had been preparing them. The routing signal had included, she understood now, an introduction. The forest's way of saying this person is here. This person has the reading capacity. This person is carrying what you need to understand what has been done to you. She stood at the clearing's edge and breathed. Kaor stood beside her. He had been to the Warden Heart 3 times. The quality of his stillness here was different from his ordinary stillness. It was the stillness of someone in the presence of something very large, managed well rather than dissolved into. They know, she said. Yes, his voice was quiet. They felt the pattern sense activation 6 hours ago. They have been, he paused. The blood speaker word is attending you specifically. The way the old growth attends a new growth that is taking an unexpected shape. She looked at the heart's pool, at the pattern of the damage, at the extraction mechanism that she could now see in its full detail, the specific threading of the high cantors, long work through the forest's own divine infrastructure, the parasitic channel that had been built so gradually, so incrementally, that each individual step had been within the noise level of natural variation in the divine network, and only the 40-year view made the accumulation legible. I can see the mechanism, she said. The extraction channel, how it's threaded through the forest's own network. She paused. It can be closed. Is that what the Deepwardens need from us? Kaor said. No, she looked at the pool. Closing the extraction channel stops the bleeding, but it doesn't replace what was taken. The heart is at 40% concentration. To function, to provide the Deepwarden presence that the clan's relationship with the forest depends on, that the divine network requires, that the Accord's founding compact specified the heart needs to be at full concentration. She paused. The only way to restore full concentration is to return what was taken. 30 years of divine essence that is currently inside Vance Solenwreath, Kaor said. Yes, she held his gaze. If the high canter is stopped, if the accumulated essence he is carrying is released and returned to the divine channel. Is that possible? Theoretically, she said. The Bloodweaver's rites include a reversal, the second burning. It's in the archive's records of the original Bloodweaver doctrine, the version that predates the current order. The second burning is the theological opposite of the extraction process. Instead of pulling divine essence from the channel into a single concentrated point, it dissolves the concentrated point and returns the essence to the channel. She paused. The conditions are specific. The person carrying the concentrated essence has to be present at the divine source, at the heart. The rite has to be conducted by a bloodweaver of sufficient skill, or, she stopped. Or, Kayor said. Or by someone with the fully activated burning mark, she said. In the original theology, the mark in its complete form includes the capacity to perform the second burning because Keth's transformation rite and the bloodweaver rites are the same root. They are both operations on divine essence in the material world, both iterations of the same fundamental theological skill. She looked at her wrist, at the disc that was no longer dormant. An archivist marked becomes more fully what an archivist is. An archivist in the original theological sense, not just the keeper of human-made records, the keeper of the record that the divine network maintains of itself. She paused. I can perform the second burning. Kayor looked at her steadily. If the high cantor is at the heart. Yes, which requires him to come here, which he will do. She looked at the clearing's far edge. Because the mechanism is here, because the war council is being convened here, because the Darath and the other clans are coming here, because the plan that the priests marshal at the Voral Pass was designed to execute the perimeter threat strategy, the false signal that draws the war council away requires the heart to be undefended for the specific window when he acts. He will act at the heart itself, Kayor said. Yes, he has to. At 40% concentration, the heart cannot provide what he needs to sustain the accumulated essence he's carrying. He needs to be here when he makes the final extraction to absorb the remainder of what's in the pool before it diminishes further. She paused. He has days at most, possibly hours. The accumulated essence he's been carrying isn't stable without the continuous source feeding it. Then the attack on the heart isn't just the end of the strategy, Kayor said. It's a medical necessity for him. Yes, she met his eyes. He is dying, and the heart's remaining divine essence is his only option, and he is coming here whether we do anything to draw him or not. A beat of silence, the pool luminesced in its diminished way. The old-growth trees absorbed the sound the way they absorbed everything, into their information-carrying roots, down to the deep rock, into the forest's memory. Then we need to be ready, Kayor said. Yes, she looked at the clearing, at the heart, at the specific geometry of the space. And I need to understand the second burning's full mechanics before the high cantor arrives. She paused. The Deepwardens may be able to show me, if they can communicate the original Bloodweaver right through the forest's information network. Ask them, Kayor said. She walked to the pool's edge and put her hand on the stone. The Deepwardens opened the channel. The Deepwarden communication was not language. The Bloodspeaker records had described it as wordless direct understanding, which Asha had taken as the record's way of communicating something that didn't translate into language, an attempt at description that acknowledged its own inadequacy. What she experienced at the pool's edge was more specific and less comfortable. The abrupt presence of a vast, old, integrated information structure that had been managing this forest for longer than the Dominion had existed, and that had, apparently, been waiting for someone to come along who had the sense to receive it properly. It was not gentle, it was thorough. The Deepwardens communicated in the forest's language, in pattern and structure, and the relationship between things rather than in sequential narrative. What they gave her was not the second burning rite as a set of instructions. What they gave her was the complete theoretical foundation of the rite, the same way the forest's routing signal was not a set of directions, but a direct integration of the forest's own spatial knowledge. She did not receive the right steps, she received its understanding, the full theological and practical comprehension of what the second burning was and did and required, and what it cost. It cost the operator. This was the thing the Bloodweaver records had been most careful about, and that the original texts had been most honest about, and that the version preserved in the Dominion's archive had, inevitably, minimized. The second burning was not a free action. You could not dissolve a concentrated point of divine essence and return it to the divine channel without being the conduit through which it passed. The return required a direction. The essence needed something to flow along, from the concentrated point back to the pool. The operator of the rite was that conduit. The experience of being the conduit, the Deepwardens communicated, was intense in ways that were difficult to articulate because the difficulty was not linguistic, but experiential. The essence of a god, 30 years of the accumulated divine substance of Solon, compressed into the body and consciousness of a single human man, passing through you on its way back to the source it had been stolen from. This was not. The Deepwardens communicated with the clarity of something very old and without any investment in making the truth comfortable, a thing that could be done without remainder. Remainder, not death, not necessarily injury in the physical sense, but not nothing. A mark, the specific kind of mark that was left by the passage of something enormously significant through something that had not been designed to carry it like the way water over time, carved the stone not by damaging it violently, but by passing through it repeatedly and being remembered. She knelt at the pool's edge and held this knowledge for a long moment. Then she stood and turned and found Kaor directly behind her, which meant he had been close enough to put his hand on her shoulder if she had needed it, which she had not needed and had not asked for, and which his presence communicated was not the point. She looked at him. "The second burning leaves a remainder," she said. "I know." He had been watching the Deepwarden communication. He had seen it from the outside, had seen whatever her face and body had done during the receipt of something enormous passing through a finite vessel. How significant? Unknown, variable by the amount of essence being returned. She paused. We don't know exactly how much is in him. The extraction ran for 30 years at a varying rate. Do you? He stopped. He had the quality of someone who was about to offer an assessment of her capacity and had recognized that this was both relevant and not his to make unilaterally. He reformulated. Is it your choice to make? Yes, she held his gaze. I am the only person here who can do it. The bloodweavers who might otherwise perform the rite have been systematically silenced for 20 years, and even if we could reach an intact bloodweaver, we don't have the time. She paused. And the mark's completed form includes the capacity specifically because Keth's theology expects that the people who receive the full transformation will eventually use it for exactly this kind of function. The original bloodweaver and the original archivist are the same role. She paused. I built the archive to understand the world completely. This is the world completely. He looked at her. His face had the directness that was his most honest quality, no management, no professional distance. The full quality of a person in the specific moment of hearing something important and being present for it. Then we prepare, he said. They arrived in the hour before dawn, which was the traditional opening of the clan war council, a tradition old enough to be older than most of the things the Accord had been built on top of, old enough that the Bloodspeakers' records of it preceded the Bloodspeakers' records themselves, as if the tradition were a fact of the forest rather than a decision of its people. Sarath Darath arrived first, with her 5 forest runners and the bearing of someone who had been running for 2 days on a message that had been difficult to run with. She looked at the Wardenheart with the expression of someone confronting evidence they had been told about and had believed intellectually, and were now encountering in full sensory reality. The heart's diminished luminescence was visible without the pattern sense. It was visible to anyone who had ever seen the heart at full capacity and was now seeing it at 40%. Sarath's face went through several expressions in quick succession and settled on the expression that Asha had come to recognize in the last 48 hours, as the clan speaker's default for we are past the point where I can manage this, and we are now in direct engagement with the unmanageable. The Bloodspeakers were right, Sarath said. Yes, Kaor said, and I have more when the other speakers arrive. They arrived in the next 2 hours, which were 2 hours of Asha studying the pool and the mechanism, and running the pattern of the second burning's requirements against her specific knowledge of the High Cantor's historical trajectory, calculating variables she could calculate and acknowledging the ones she couldn't. The Sunkenash clan speaker was a woman named Vorel who had the specific quality of the oldest clan's leadership, an authority that didn't announce itself and didn't need to, that was present the way the forest's oldest trees were present. She arrived with a party of 3 and looked at Kaor and said, simply. The war speaker convened us directly. The matter is therefore at the level of existence. Yes, Kaor said. At the level of the Deepwarden's existence, and therefore the clan's existence, and therefore the forest's independence. He paused. Before I convene the full council, I need to present evidence that affects the Kessin seat's standing. Vorel looked at him with the assessment quality. The Kessin clan speaker is not here yet, Kaor said. When he arrives, he cannot be part of the initial evidence assessment. The evidence directly implicates his appointment. He paused. I require the 5 present speakers to hear it first. The remaining 2 speakers, from the Thune and Merving clans, arrived within the next 30 minutes, the Thune speaker already knowing something was wrong from the forest's communication. The Thune were the most forest-integrated of the 7 clans, their blood speakers maintaining the most active connection to the Deepwarden network. The Merving speaker arriving with the quality of someone who had been given incomplete information and had been building their assessment on the road. Asha presented the evidence. She presented it the way she had been presenting evidence for 15 years, with the clean, structural precision of the archive, without editorializing, without the rhetorical shaping that turns evidence into argument before the evidence has been fully examined. She laid out the Dominion archive anomalies, the blood speaker pattern, the extraction mechanism's structure and history and current state, the Kessin succession and its relationship to the previous clan speaker's death, and the timing of the first blood speaker documentation. The 5 clan speakers listened with the full quality of people who had been running their territories for long enough to know that the gap between what they had known and what was actually true was where the most important decisions lived. When she finished, Vorel of Sunkenash said, "The Kessin clan speaker's appointment is under review." This was the formal phrase, the one that suspended a clan speaker's authority pending investigation, and it had the quality of a formal phrase that was being used for the first time in living memory and possibly longer. "Agreed," said Sarath Darath. The other 3 added their agreement. "Then the War Council convenes without the Kessin seat," Kaor said. "The standing threshold is met by 5 of 7. He looked at the assembled speakers. "The War Council's immediate concern is the defense of the Wardenheart against the approach of the High Cantor's force, and the specific requirements of the second burning rite for the restoration of the heart's divine essence." Thresh Kessin arrived 30 minutes later. He arrived alone, which was the first anomaly clan speakers traveled with their designation runners, the symbolic honor guard required by the convocation rites. He arrived running, which was the second anomaly. A clan speaker did not run to a war council, the deliberate pace being part of the authority's expression. And he arrived from the west, which was the wrong direction for the Kessin territory. He entered the clearing and looked at the assembled council and understood, in the specific fraction of a second, that people who have built elaborate secrets possess for recognizing their exposure, what had happened. He did not run. Asha had noted this, and noted that she was unsurprised. A man who had spent 3 years managing the Kessin clan's position in service of an arrangement that had cost his predecessor's life, and the forest's divine health would not run, because running acknowledged the situation in a way that he was still, even now, trying to avoid. He looked at Kaor, War Speaker. "Clan Speaker Thresh," Kaor said. He used the full title with the specific quality of someone using a title that was currently under suspension, but had not yet been formally revoked. "The War Council has convened without the Kessin seat. You are welcome as an observer." A pause. "You may not speak on matters of strategy or vote on matters of defense." Thresh looked at him, looked at Asha, looked at the heart's pool with its diminished luminescence, with the quality of someone confronting their own work and being confronted by it. He sat at the clearing's edge, away from the formal circle, in the position of an observer. The War Council's first decision was the defense arrangement. Kaor presented the strategic analysis, the perimeter threat strategy, the false signal mechanism, the High Cantor's timeline and approach. He presented it with the clarity that 20 years of war speaker experience in the specific domain of the Deepwoods defense provided. The forest's communication network as an intelligence asset, the clan runner's position and capability, the specific terrain of the Wardenheart clearing and its approaches. The 5 clan speakers engaged with the strategic analysis, the way people engaged with it when it was genuinely their lives on the table, with the full, direct attention of people who were not performing consideration, but actually considering. Asha contributed the High Cantor's tactical profile, the priest's marshal she had seen at the pass, the numbers Kaor had counted on their approach, the timeline of the main force's forest entry and progress. She contributed the second burning's requirements, the specific conditions under which the rite could be executed, what it needed from the surrounding environment, how the defense arrangement would need to accommodate it. The defense cannot clear the clearing, she said. The rite requires the High Cantor to be at the pool. If he is intercepted at the clearing's edge, the opportunity for the second burning doesn't exist. You are asking us to let him reach the heart, Vorel of Sunken Ash said. I am asking you to let him think he has reached the heart uncontested, she said. The rite requires the essence carrier to be in contact with the pool. He has to believe the heart is accessible, has to commit to the extraction action before the rite can begin. She paused. The perimeter defense's role is to prevent the War Council from being drawn away, to maintain the defensive ring while appearing to respond to the perimeter threat, and when he reaches the pool. You are there, Sareth Dareth said, not a question, an assessment. Yes. The council was quiet for a moment. There is a remainder, Vorel said, not phrased as a question. The Sunken Ash blood speakers had been the most deeply integrated with the Wardenheart's communication network. She knew what the Deep Wardens had shown. Yes, Asha said. You accept this. I accept the rite and its conditions, she said, which is different from accepting the remainder as a foregone conclusion. The remainder is variable. Its extent depends on factors I cannot fully predict. She paused. What I accept is that the rite is necessary and that I am the person who can perform it and that the archive's existence, the Accord's restoration, the Deepwood's survival, these are things worth the specific risk. Vorel looked at her for a long moment with the specific quality of the oldest clan's assessment. The look that had the forest's years behind it, that had seen generation after generation of the Deepwoods, people make the specific kind of decision that was now being made. Keth's children, Vorel said, which was the ancient blessing, the one from the canticles that predated the Accord. Those who transform willingly in service of the whole. Asha did not feel blessed. She felt clear, which was the closest thing to blessed she had ever experienced. We begin the positioning, Kaor said to the council, and the War Council became the thing it was designed to be. Vance Solenreath entered the Deepwood before noon. Asha knew this through the forest's information network, felt the specific disturbance of a large, organized force moving through the old growth's communication channels, the forest registering their presence the way the archive registered a new document, with complete, neutral, comprehensive attention. She had the pattern sense running at full depth now, the completed mark's capacity operating at the level the Deep Wardens had shown her it could reach, and what she felt through the forest's network was significant. Not just the main force's movement. Beneath that, something else. The specific signature of a concentrated mass of divine essence moving through the forest's ambient field. The way a very large stone displaces water differently from a small one, the displacement itself communicating the stone's weight. The High Cantor was carrying everything he had accumulated. 30 years of Solon's extracted divine essence, compressed into a body that was 81 years old, and had been kept functioning well past its natural limit by that same extracted essence's proximity effect. She could feel, through the pattern sense, the strain of it, the way the accumulated essence was destabilizing in the absence of the source that had been feeding it, the way a system that has been running on borrowed energy behaves when the borrowing ends. He was not well. He was not dying in the way of ordinary people, not the slow, organic failure of an aging body. He was dying in the way of something that has been held together by external force and is now discovering that the external force has ended. Fast and specific and irreversible without intervention. Which made him more dangerous, not less. She held this clearly, the desperation of a man who was dying of a cause that had 30 years of careful planning behind it. Kior was at the clearing's north edge, managing the defense arrangement. The two lines of forest runners, the specific positioning designed to respond to the perimeter threat in a way that maintained the clearing's protection while appearing to leave it accessible. He was doing this with the economy of motion and communication she had observed in the pass fight. All the war speakers' 20 years of forest defense practice, expressed in the compact gestures and forest words that the clan runners understood without the need for explanation. He had looked at her once before moving to position with the specific quality she had been filing in the unexamined place. He had said nothing. She had said nothing. The communication had been complete. She was at the pool. She had been at the pool for 2 hours, and the Deepwardens had been with her for those 2 hours. Not intrusively, not in the overwhelming full communication of the earlier exchange, but in the steady background presence of something very large and very old and entirely focused on the same point she was focused on. The second burning's preparation had a meditative requirement. Not the triune faith's liturgical meditation, the performative stillness of the Lightsinger rite, but the actual internal organization that the rite required, the clearing of the conduit, the making ready of the pathway through which the essence would pass. She thought about what it meant to be ready. The archive was built on the same principle. You did not wait for the document to arrive and then decide how to receive it. You built the system that could receive anything and hold it in the right relationship to everything else. Readiness was infrastructure. She built the infrastructure. She had 15 years of practice in holding multiple information structures simultaneously. The second burning's conduit preparation required something similar. The clearing of all the things that would impede the passage, the internal architecture that was specifically not about force or will, but about structure. The more fully she could be herself, the complete archivist, the fully activated transformation, the cleaner the conduit would be and the less the remainder would cost. This was the counterintuitive truth of Keth's original theology that the Dominion's military version had lost. The transformation was not about adding power to the self. It was about removing the obstacles to the self. Not more, but less. Not adding capacity, but removing the friction that had always been there between a person and what they were meant to be. She breathed. She let the Deepwarden presence attend her, and the pool's diminished light was what it was, and the old-growth trees were what they were, and the forest was itself entirely, and she heard him. He entered the clearing from the east, which was the direction she had calculated, and the direction the forest's routing had predicted, the approach that most directly preceded the pool. The approach that required the least commitment to the clearing before the pool came into view. A man who had been planning this for 30 years would approach with maximum exit options for as long as possible. He had 4 priests marshal with him. 2 had remained at the perimeter. She could feel through the forest network, the shouted alarm at the north edge, the perimeter threat manifesting in exactly the form the strategy required, the War Council's defensive ring engaging with the well-executed urgency of people who did not know it was a false alarm. The 2 priests marshal remaining with the High Cantor were his personal guard, his absolute last protection. She did not stand when he entered the clearing. She was still at the pool's edge, her hand on the stone, the Deepwarden presence behind her, not fighting his approach, not the martial readiness of the pass, but the readiness of someone who understood that what she was doing was not fighting but receiving. The second burning was not an attack. It was a return. Vance Solenreath was 81 years old and was not ordinary. She had read his administrative file extensively and had not been able to construct, from the file alone, the full picture of what 30 years of accumulated divine essence did to a person's physical form. The priests marshal she had seen at the pass had been ordinary humans in excellent physical condition. Their superior was something different. A man whose body had been maintained past its natural end by the proximity of enormous power, whose eyes held the specific quality of Solin's divine essence. The light color of the Lightsinger, Order's highest theological experience, the clear gold white of direct divine contact, and whose physical presence carried the weight of the divine concentration that the pattern sense registered as the largest individual mass she had felt since the completed Mark's activation. He stopped when he saw her. Not because he had not expected someone to be here. She suspected he had expected a defense, had planned for it, had planned for the version of this encounter where he overwhelmed the defender and reached the pool through the priest's marshal's combat. He stopped because of what she was, specifically. Because the pattern sense was not unidirectional, and whatever he could perceive of the divine channel, he could perceive the completed mark the way the forest had perceived it, as Keth's work, fully expressed, present at the pool in a way that required him to recalculate. "The Dominion Archivist," he said. His voice was extraordinary, not a voice that a person of 81 would ordinarily have, resonant in the specific way of proximity to decades of divine essence. "The Archive's master." "Yes," she said. "You found the pattern in the records." He looked at her with the assessment of a man who had been managing a very long and very careful secret and was now looking at the person who had unraveled it. "Yes." "And the war speaker brought you to the Deepwood." "Yes." "And you have," he looked at the pool, at her hand on the stone. At the Deepwood presence he could presumably feel in some form, and the second burning preparation whose infrastructure she had been building for 2 hours. He understood. She watched him understand. "You cannot perform the second burning," he said. "You are not a bloodweaver. The rite requires Keth's ordained." "The rite requires Keth's fully activated transformation," she said, "which the Archive's original records, the ones before your predecessor's editorial revisions, specify as the same function. The Bloodweaver Order is the institutionalization of a capacity that exists in any person with the complete mark." She looked at him steadily. "You suppressed those records too." "They were in the Bloodweaver's internal archive, not the Triune Review Body's records, and you couldn't remove them from both without the Bloodweavers noticing. So you removed the Bloodweavers." His jaw tightened. 20 years of systematic silencing," she said. "The publications that stopped, the presentations that were no longer submitted, the individuals who, how many?" "The Bloodweavers were a dying order long before I was High Cantor," he said, and she heard in the voice beneath the divine resonance, the ordinary human voice of a man who had been telling himself a version of the truth for 30 years and had worn the version smooth. "They were losing membership, losing relevance, their practices dismissed by both other orders as theologically unsound. I accelerated a process that was already underway." "No," she said. "They were losing membership because you were systematically removing the members who were publishing research adjacent to the extraction mechanism, the ones who were getting close to understanding what you were doing, the ones whose work, if preserved and read together, would have produced the same pattern I found in the Dominion's archive." She paused. "You didn't accelerate a dying order. You killed a living one." The 2 priests marshal at his flanks shifted their weight. She registered it without looking at them, registered the threat assessment through the pattern sense, and held it in the peripheral awareness and kept her attention on the High Cantor. "The heart is at 40%, she said. "You can feel it. You know what the extraction has cost, and you know," she looked at him directly. "You know it isn't stable, what you're carrying. You've known for the last 9 months since the avatar manifestation ended, since the source stopped feeding it." He was very still. "You need the heart's remaining concentration," she said, "to stabilize what you have, to prevent the accumulated essence from dispersing, from returning to the channel on its own." "It won't disperse on its own," he said. "The containment." "The containment was designed when the source was still active," she said. "The containment assumed a continuous feed from the extraction mechanism. The mechanism's feed ended 9 months ago. The containment has been running on the stored essence itself, consuming a portion of what it contains to maintain the structure that contains it." She looked at him. "You have less now than you did 9 months ago, and the rate of containment loss has been accelerating." He looked at her, looked at the pool. The divine resonant eyes had the quality of someone looking at a calculation they had been running for 30 years and discovering that a variable had been wrong from the beginning. "I can give you what you need," she said. He went still in a different way. "Not the pool," she said. "The pool is not the answer. Taking the remaining 40% would destroy the Deepwarden presence, collapse the forest's divine network, and the clans would be at the Dominion's mercy within a generation. You know this. She paused. What you need is stability. What you need is not more essence, but a return to the channel, a restoration that allows what you are carrying to find its equilibrium, to stop consuming itself to maintain the containment. You are describing the second burning, he said. I am describing a version of it, she said. A version that stabilizes rather than extracts. That returns the accumulated essence to the channel while maintaining whatever biological function the 30-year proximity has genuinely created in you. She paused. You are 81 years old, and your body has been running on divine essence for 30 years. There may be a way to separate the artificial extension, the borrowed time, from the genuine transformation. What the proximity has permanently changed in you, the parts that are now actually yours. You don't know if that's possible, he said. I don't know, she agreed. The second burning's mechanics, as the Deepwardens communicated them to me, included that possibility. As a theoretical condition, whether it's achievable in practice depends on, she paused, on both of us. He looked at her. The priest's marshal looked at the high cantor. The forest breathed around the clearing. If you proceed to the pool without my involvement, she said, the clan war council will return from the perimeter in approximately 7 minutes. You have 2 priests marshal. The war council has Sarath Darath's full force and the Sunken Ash runners and Kaor. She paused. You will not reach the pool in time. And if I proceed with your involvement, he said, I am trusting the second burning's execution to a person whose interest is demonstrably not my preservation. My interest is the Accord's restoration and the heart's survival, she said. Your death, specifically, is not my interest. The return of the accumulated essence to the channel is. She held his gaze. I am an archivist. I have spent 15 years building the most complete map of the world that has ever existed. The map includes the part where Vance Solenreath lived long enough to be held accountable for what he did to Solin's avatar, to the Bloodweavers, to the Deepwood. She paused. That accountability requires you to be alive. The silence was long and full. Then the high cantor of the Lightsingers dismissed his priest's marshal. She did not watch the priest's marshal leave. She did not watch anything except the pool and the conduit structure and the specific attention of the Deepwarden presence, which was with her completely now, the full depth of the forest's consciousness available in a way it had not been for the diagnostic communication. The high cantor knelt at the pool's edge. He moved slowly, not the slowness of caution, but the slowness of a body that was close to its actual limit, the accumulated 30 years of divine essence that had been maintaining his biological function now itself failing, the containment consuming the last of its reserves. She could feel it through the pattern sense, the specific and terrible beauty of a system approaching collapse, each component drawing on the others in a cascading failure that had its own tragic logic. He put his hands in the pool. The contact between the high cantor's accumulated essence and the pool's remaining concentration produced a resonance that the pattern sense registered as the loudest thing she had ever felt. Not loud in the acoustic sense, but in the information sense, the sudden overwhelming presence of 30 years of stolen divine power in direct contact with the source it had been stolen from. She placed her hand on his shoulder. The conduit opened. The second burning was not fire. The name was theological. The first burning was Keth's original transformation, the activation of the mark. The second was the completion, the return of what the first had made capable, the full expression of the Archivist's function when the Archivist's function was applied to the most complete archive that existed, the record that the divine network maintained of itself, which was the record of everything that had ever been. 30 years of Solin's divine essence, passing through her from the high cantor back to the pool. She held the conduit open with the structure she had been building for 2 hours, the cleared pathway, the organized receptivity of someone who had spent 15 years building the right infrastructure for receiving anything. The essence did not feel like she had expected. She had expected force, had expected the overwhelming pressure of something vast passing through something small. What she felt was older than force and quieter, the specific quality of something finding its way home. The divine essence of a god who had been held in wrong places for 3 decades, passing through the open conduit of a fully transformed human being, returning to the source where it could rest. not all of it. The conduit required discernment as well as openness, and the Deepwardens guided the process, and the pattern sense allowed the specific separation she had described to the High Cantor. The accumulated essence that was purely artificial, the borrowed time, the containment structure that had no equivalent in his natural biology, that went fully through and returned to the pool. The parts that were genuine transformation, the places where 30 years of proximity had permanently altered his biology in ways that were now as natural as his own heartbeat, those she held at the boundary, returning them not to the pool but to him. This was the most difficult discrimination she had ever been asked to make. She made it. She held the conduit, she held the discernment, she held the structure through the full passage, and the pool's luminescence rose as the essence returned, and the Deepwarden presence expanded with the specific quality of something that has been diminished for a long time, discovering that the diminishment is ending. And the old-growth trees above them registered the change in a way she felt through the forest's network as the sound of very old, very quiet joy. The passage took 11 minutes. When it ended, she was on the pool's stone floor, with her left hand still in the water, which was warm now, the luminescence at her wrist bright with the restored concentration. She was aware of several things in quick succession. The High Cantor was alive, which was what she had intended. He was on the pool's far side, sitting with his back against the old-growth roots, and he was 64 years old, which was his actual age minus the biological extension the divine proximity had provided, not 81, the age of what he had artificially extended himself to, but 64, the age of what he genuinely was. He was looking at his hands with the expression of a man who had been a specific thing for 30 years and had just discovered that the specific thing had an end. The remainder was significant. Not in the way she had feared, not the catastrophic kind, not the kind that left a person unable to function, but the specific mark of a conduit through which something enormous had passed. A clarity, a completeness, a sense of the pattern sense running at a depth and a breadth that was permanently different from before, as if the passage of 30 years of divine essence through the conduit had not damaged the conduit but had worn it into a new shape, a better shape, the shape of something that had been used for what it was made for and was now fully itself. She felt the Deepwarden presence, full and complete, for the first time at the heart's full concentration. She felt the forest breathe. And then she felt Keor's hand on her shoulder and looked up and found him kneeling beside her with the expression that was the fullest version of the unguarded face, everything managed entirely absent, just him. "The remainder," he said. "I'm here," she said, which was both the answer to an unasked question and its own specific statement. He exhaled. She let him help her stand. The War Council convened in full, in the clearing, with the heart restored and the Deepwarden presence present in the full weight of its restored capacity. Keor had returned from the perimeter with the clarity that the false signal strategy had worked exactly as designed, and the Priests Marshal had withdrawn upon finding the War Council's defense intact, and the High Cantor's Priests Marshal dismissing themselves. The full clan force was assembled. Sarath Dareth and her runners, Vorel Sunkenash's party, the Thune and Mervain, and the runners who had come through the forest's routing network in response to the emergency convening. And in the circle's designated observer position, the Kessin runners who had arrived from the northeast, and who were looking at their clan speaker with the expression of people who had been receiving a version of events that was now visibly incomplete. Keor presented the War Council's findings in the direct formal language of the War Speaker's report. The evidence of the divine channel's compromise, the High Cantor's mechanism and history, the second burning's execution and outcome, the heart's restoration. He presented Thresh Kessin's suspension and the basis for it. Thresh did not contest the suspension. He sat in the observer position with the look of a man who had built something on a foundation he had not chosen and was now looking at the foundation's actual nature for the first time. The War Council's decisions were made in the careful, formal way of the clan tradition, each speaker's voice given equal weight, the decisions building by consensus rather than by majority, the process slower than a single authority's ruling and more durable. The first decision, The evidence of the Triune Faith's divine channel compromise was to be formally submitted to the Accord's neutral review body, the one institution in the Three Empire system that had been designed specifically for matters of this scale, the body that the Accord's founding documents had specified for exactly the category of event that the Three Empires' individual governance structures were not designed to handle. The second decision. The Deepwood clans would request formal hearings on the Lightsinger Order's governance and the High Cantor's accountability, to be conducted by the Accord's review body with the full participation of all 7 clans. The third decision, and this was the one that Sarath Darath brought to the table with the specific quality of someone who has been waiting to say a thing for a long time and is finally saying it in the right setting, concerned the political question that had been fracturing the clans for 20 years. The Empire question. The Alliance question. The question of what the Deepwood's relationship to the surrounding political structures should be in the changed world. The evidence before this council, Sarath said, demonstrates that the Deepwood's independence is not simply a founding value. It is a structural necessity for the triune divine channel's function. The Deepwooden presence, which the channel depends on, is only possible in a forest that is not subject to extraction by external powers, political, theological, or otherwise. She paused. The High Cantor's mechanism required the forest's divine amplification capacity, which required the forest to be in the specific undisturbed condition that the clan's independence protects. She paused again. If the Darath and Kessin informal arrangements with the Dominion had produced formal access agreements, if the forest's margins had been open to the kind of resource extraction that formal alliance often produces, the extraction mechanism's amplification capacity would have been compromised, the High Cantor's plan would have failed, and the divine channel damage would have manifested differently. Faster, more visibly. She looked around the circle. The independence of the Deepwood is not sentimental. It is theological. The founding compact was right. The War Council's third decision was the reaffirmation of the Deepwood clan's independence, with the specific theological basis now documented in the War Council's formal record. Thresh Kessin, from the observer position, said, "The Kessin clan's informal arrangement with the Valdric Dominion will be formally ended." "Yes," Kaor said, "it will." The Kessin runners were looking at their clan speaker, with the expression of people reassembling a picture that had been presented to them in pieces. She spoke with Vance Solenreath in the afternoon, when the War Council had concluded, and the forest had returned to its ordinary function, the extraordinary and the ordinary having settled into each other, as they always did, the world reorganizing itself around the fact of a significant event, the way water reorganized around a stone. She sat across from him at the pool's edge. He was 64 years old, sitting in the body that was actually his, and the 30 years of artificial extension showed in a way that had nothing to do with physical appearance, in the specific quality of someone who has just lost a weight they had been carrying so long they had forgotten it was a weight, the strange lightness of it. "You are going to ask me to testify," he said. "The Accord's review body will ask you to testify," she said. "Yes. And if I cooperate." "The review body's process is not mine to negotiate," she said. "But the record will contain what you give it and what it can independently verify. Cooperation is reflected in the record the same way refusal is reflected." He looked at the pool, at the restored luminescence, the full concentration, the heart complete in a way it had not been for 30 years. He looked at it for a long time. "I was 29 when I found the original canticles," he said. She did not tell him she already had the relevant section of his file in her head. She let him speak. "The suppressed version, the third second compact, the section that describes what the Avatar manifestation actually is." He paused. "The Lightsinger's doctrine presents the Avatar as a gift Solon choosing to enter material form for the benefit of the faithful, a voluntary, temporary, joyful expression of divine generosity." "The original texts describe it as painful," she said. He looked at her. "I have the original texts," she said. "The suppressed version, it was in the archive." She paused. "The third second compact describes the Avatar manifestation as a profound cost to the divine essence, the equivalent of a person temporarily abandoning the continuous flow of their own consciousness to inhabit a single fixed point. Painful for the god, a thing done for urgent purposes, not light ones. She paused. You found this and understood that the doctrine had been misrepresenting the avatar for centuries, he said. That the light singers had been calling the manifestations as evidence of Solon's love for the faithful when they were actually evidence of Solon's pain, of the god diminishing themselves in a way that the faithful had not been told about. His voice had the quality of someone speaking about something old. I was angry. I was 29, and I was angry at the doctrine, and at the order that had maintained the comfortable lie. And then you found the extraction mechanism, she said. In the Bloodweaver's archive, he said, a theoretical section in an unpublished manuscript, not intended as practice as a theological thought experiment about the nature of divine essence's movement between planes, what it would require, what it would produce. He paused. I recognized it as achievable, as something that could be done if the conditions were managed carefully enough. You planned it for how long? 7 years, he said, before the first attempt. He paused. I told myself it was a mercy, that the avatar manifestations were causing Solon pain, that the accumulated cost of the avatar cycles was itself a form of harm, and that, he stopped. That if the essence was going to be spent regardless, it was better for it to be spent in a way that kept you alive, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. She looked at the pool. At the restored heart, the Deepwardens present and complete, and attending the afternoon with the full depth of their renewed capacity. The review body will ask you these questions, she said, and the answers will be in the record, and the record will be in the archive. She paused. Permanently. He looked at her. Is that meant as a threat? It is meant as a fact, she said. The archive is the most complete map of the world that has ever existed. You are part of the world. What you did, what you chose, why you chose it, these are part of the record. The archive does not redact. It does not make comfortable. She paused. It also does not fail to include context or mitigating evidence. Or the 32 years before the first extraction when you were a priest of genuine faith who was genuinely angry at a doctrine that had been lying to the faithful. She paused. The archive is complete. That is both worse and better than selective recording. He was quiet for a long time. I have been the high cantor for 37 years, he said. I do not know how to be anything else. No, she said, but that is not today's problem. She stood. Today's problem was the heart. The heart is restored. She looked at him. Tomorrow's problem is the testimony. She left him at the pool. The Deepwood at evening had a specific quality that was different from the Deepwood at night, and different from the Deepwood in the day's working hours. A settling, a preparation, the forest transitioning between its active processing states, with the unhurried competence of a system that had been doing this for longer than any observer had been present to notice. Asha walked the clearing's edge with the pattern sense open at the depth the completed mark allowed, which was a different experience of walking than any she had previously had. Not more beautiful, she had always found the world sufficiently beautiful through ordinary perception, had always been capable of the specific pleasure of reading a landscape well. Different, more complete. The way the archive was more complete than any individual document, not more vivid, but more true. She was aware that she was tired in a way that was also something other than tired. The remainder was not painful, was not, in fact, unpleasant. It had the quality of something worn in, the way good tools acquired a patina of use that made them work better rather than worse. The conduit was open now in a way it had never been before, and the pattern sense ran through it with a clarity that was its own kind of sensation, not exhilarating, exactly, but full. Kior found her at the clearing's north edge, where the old growth was thickest, where two of the largest trees had grown so close together that their roots were indistinguishable at the surface, the boundary between them as theoretical as the boundary between things that had shared space long enough to become one system. He stood beside her without speaking first. This was characteristic, the specific patience of someone who had learned, in 20 years of working in a system that communicated through the quality of silence, that arriving in the right silence was more useful than arriving with words that weren't ready. She let the silence be what it was for a while. "The archive will need rebuilding," she said, eventually. Not avoiding the other things, building to them in the way that made sense to her, through the peripheral, the approach that circled the real thing at the right distance until the distance was no longer necessary. "The suppressed records," he said. "Not just the missing evidence from the review body's archive, the original canticles, the Bloodweaver manuscripts, the theoretical material that was removed over 40 years. All of it needs to be recovered and integrated." She paused. "The Bloodweaver order will need to be reconstituted. The records of the suppression are a foundation for that. The pattern sense can help. The completed mark includes the capacity to trace the original sources even from incomplete records, to reconstruct the shape of what was removed from the shape of what remains around it." "Like the shape of a gap," he said. "Like the shape of a gap," she agreed. "The archive has always been built partly from what wasn't there. The missing documents are information the same way present documents are. They tell you something, just differently." She paused. "The Deepwood's Bloodspeaker archive needs to be formally connected to the Dominion's archive. The two systems together are more accurate than either separately. The Bloodspeakers will resist a formal connection to any Empire's administrative structure," he said. "It doesn't need to be an Empire's connection," she said. "It needs to be a Deepwood connection. A formal acknowledgement that the Bloodspeaker archive and the Dominion archive are both records of the same world, and that the world is better understood when the records speak to each other." She paused. "The Accord's neutral review body could host the connection, under Divine Compact, not under any Empire's governance." She felt him looking at her with the quality she had been filing in the unexamined place for the entirety of this journey, which had been filed there because the journey had not been the time for examining it, and was now, the heart restored, the high canter accounted for, the forest breathing its full breath, potentially a different situation. She turned to look at him. "The patterns," she said, "that I can see with the completed mark, the connections between information structures, the relationships between the forest's knowledge and the archive's knowledge and the Triune Divine Channel's self-record." She paused. "They are complete in a way I had not anticipated. The world is more thoroughly connected than the archive I was building could capture. The archive was always a map. The map is," she searched for the right word, "smaller than the territory, by more than I had understood." He looked at her with the quality. "You expected to complete the map," he said. "I expected the map to be the point," she said. "The goal, the most complete representation." She paused. "The map is a tool, the territory is the point, and the territory is," she looked at the forest, at the old growth and the deep roots and the deepward presence and the restored heart and the specific quality of the evening settling into the oldest living system she had ever been part of. "Extraordinary," she said. She was aware that the word applied to more than the forest. "There is a specific difficulty," she said, "with the kind of perception the completed mark provides. You see the connections between things very clearly. You see the pattern of what is and what could be and what the relationship between two information structures makes possible when they are placed in the right proximity to each other." She looked at him. "It requires discernment. The pattern sense doesn't tell you which connections to act on. It tells you they exist." "And you choose," he said. "And I choose," she said. He was quiet for a moment. The evening light in the Deepwood had the quality of the forest's specific aesthetics. Not a sunset. The canopy absorbed the direct light too thoroughly for the sky's colors to be the primary event, but a changing of the light's character. A shift from the active quality of the day to the attending quality of the evening, the forest settling into its different register. "You are going back to Varenthal," he said. "Yes, the archive, the Dominion's administrative archive, needs to be restructured around the new information. The pattern the completed mark allows me to hold is larger than what could be held before. The archive can be rebuilt to reflect that." She paused. "It will take years, the Bloodweaver archive reconstruction alone." "Years," he said. "At least 3 for the initial integration, longer for the full project." "And the Bloodspeaker connection you described," he said. "The formal acknowledgement that the two archives are records of the same world." would require a representative of the Deepwoods Bloodspeaker tradition to be available for the integration work, she said. Not continuously. The work can be done by correspondence for much of it, but the initial structural decisions require direct collaboration. She looked at him. He looked at her. The War Speaker's role, he said, has historically been based at the Deepwoods Internal Council Center, not at the Varanthal Diplomatic Quarter. Historically, she said. The diplomatic quarter posting was a strategic decision for a specific strategic context, he said. That context has changed considerably in the last 8 days. The Darath clan speaker made the suggestion herself, Asha said, when we discussed the archive integration. She noted that the War Speaker's range of function had always included extended diplomatic engagements, and that the precedent for extended Varanthal postings was already established. He looked at her. The quality in his expression was fully visible, the thing she had been filing in the unexamined place, now examined, now legible, the specific warmth that was not the analytical quality or the strategic quality or the management quality, but simply itself. You spoke with Sarath about the posting before speaking with me, he said. I spoke with Sarath about the institutional architecture, she said. I am speaking with you about the other thing. The other thing, he said. The connection that the pattern sense shows is there, she said. The one I am choosing to act on. She held his gaze with the clean directness she applied to everything that was real. I am not practiced at this, she said. The archive has always been clearer to me than people, but the completed mark, she paused. The completed mark makes the connections between information structures perfectly legible, and the information structure that is most present, most significant, she stopped. He took a step closer. Not the measured diplomatic distance of the Varanthal meeting, not the tactical proximity of the Voral Pass or the campfire nights. The distance of two people who have been making the same choice in parallel and have arrived at the same place. I am aware, she said, that I have been building a case rather than saying a thing. Yes, he said. The thing is, she looked at him, at the forest light on his face and the 20 years of the deepwood in his eyes and the specific quality of someone who had been waiting for the right moment with the patient trust that the right moment would come. The thing is that I find you, she stopped. She chose the accurate word instead of the strategic one. Remarkable, she said. In the actual sense, the thing that exceeds the ordinary, the thing I had not accounted for. She paused. The archive has a gap where you should have been for 15 years. He put his hand against her face in the way that was neither the war speaker's formal gesture nor the diplomatic distance, but something that was specific to this person at this moment, warm and deliberate and unhurried. She let it be what it was. The archive will have to be rebuilt, he said. Yes. It will take years. At least 3 for the initial integration, she said, which was technically a repetition of information already stated and was also between 2 people who had been using information as their primary language for 8 days, an acknowledgement of something quite specific. He almost smiled. The full version, the one she had seen at the Voral Pass and had been carrying since. Then the posting to Varanthal, he said, is sufficient for the initial phase. Yes, she said. The forest breathed around them. The warden heart luminesced at full concentration in the clearing, and the Deepwarden presence was complete and ancient, and attending the evening with the quality of something that had been part of the world for longer than the concepts of beginnings or endings were old. And the old-growth trees were the old-growth trees, which was a statement so complete it required nothing added to it. She kept her hand against his chest where it had arrived without her fully deciding to place it, and felt the warmth of him, and let the pattern sense do its unceasing work of reading connections, and found this one to be accurate. True, the thing it was. We have the High Cantor's testimony to organize before dawn, she said. Yes, he said. And the War Council's formal record. Yes. And the routing back to the Varanthal Road will need to account for the possibility that the retreating priests marshal reported to the main force, and the main force. Reva, he said. She stopped. He was looking at her with the full warmth. Not tonight, he said. Tonight the forest is restored. Tonight we are here. He paused. "The archive will be there tomorrow." She looked at him. She thought about the archive, the 15 years of building it, the specific, patient, incremental work of understanding the world completely. She thought about the map and the territory and the gap between them. She had spent 15 years building the map. The territory had arrived 8 days ago with a measured distance across a records table and 2 hours of shared work in a lamplight room. "The archive can wait," she said. He smiled, the full version. She kept it in the part of her that kept significant things, which was the same part as the archive, which was the same part as everything, which was herself. They returned to Varenthal on the 14th day, 6 days longer than the optimistic timeline, which had become the actual timeline after the Wardenheart, after the High Cantor's formal testimony before the War Council, after the first coordination meeting between Asha and the Dareth Bloodspeaker Irth descendant, who had been the one to first compile the anomaly records that had eventually become the Bloodspeaker Archive's central document. The return route was different from the approach. They went south through the forest to the Sunkenash territory, where Vorel had organized a clan escort through the forest's southern edge, and to the beginning of the Dominion's managed farmland, and from there east to Varenthal's south gate, which was the gate used by merchant convoys and diplomatic parties returning from the forest territories, and which had none of the political sensitivity of the East Gate's military patrol structure. She had sent a runner ahead from the forest edge, a short message to Leth Valdric, in the specific shorthand that the archive used for sensitive communications, that contained the summary of events and the status of the High Cantor, and the formal request for the Accord's review body to be convened, and a shorter message to Sieve, in the completely ordinary language of an archivist returning from extended fieldwork, that said, "I will be back by the 14th day. Do not reorganize the West section." She arrived at the archive at noon on the 14th day to find Sieve at her desk with the air of someone who had been maintaining routine very carefully and was not going to ask any of the significant questions until the appropriate moment. "The West section," Asha said. "Untouched," Sieve said. "Also, the Warden Commander has been here twice, and there is a sealed document on your desk from the Triune review body, dated 2 days ago." She went to her desk. The sealed document was from Elder Sune of the Ashville, not the Triune review body itself, but the Ashville's representative to it, which was the specific channel she had anticipated, Sune having been the Triune Faith's most consistent voice of structural accountability for the last 30 years. The document requested her formal testimony before the review body and contained, in the measured language of someone who had been watching the Triune Faith's internal structure for decades, a statement of support for the War Council's findings that amounted to the most significant religious authority in the Triune Faith, formally acknowledging the divine channel's compromise. She sat at her desk and looked at the archive around her, the 15 years of building, the specific taxonomy, the map of the world that was simultaneously complete, and she understood now with the pattern sense's full depth, the beginning of something larger. The archive could hold more. The completed mark allowed her to see the connections that had always existed in the data, but that she had not previously had the processing capacity to make fully legible. The places where the Dominion's records, and the Bloodspeaker archive, and the Triune Faith's theological history were all describing the same event from different angles. The places where 3 records in 3 different systems were the same record. The places where the map's incompleteness was not the absence of documents, but the absence of the right relationships between them. She was still sitting with this when Kaor came in. He had done what he had said he would do, gone to the Dareth clan's border, post to formally communicate the War Council's decisions and his own extended posting to Varenthal, and then come to the archive, which was where she had said she would be. The archive was, she was discovering, going to be the organizing location of the next phase of things, which was appropriate because it had been the organizing location of everything for 15 years. He looked at the archive around him, at the 15 years of taxonomy, the specific organizational structure that only made full sense if you could hold the whole thing simultaneously, and she watched him read it. Not the way she read it, not with the pattern sense's full depth, but with 20 years of the forest's information reading, which was its own version of the same faculty. Different language, same reading. "The West section," he said. She left it untouched. He moved to look at it. The section she had been building for 2 years, the one she had never been able to fully articulate the taxonomy of, the one that had always been slightly wrong in its organization, because she had been building it with a dormant mark and an incomplete understanding of what the records in it were describing. She came to stand beside him. She looked at the section with the pattern sense's full depth. She could see, immediately, what it needed, the reorganization that the completed mark allowed her to perceive, the specific taxonomy that made the relationships in the West section legible in the same way the rest of the archive's sections were legible. "The West section," she said, "is the section containing the Triune Faith's original records, the pre-accord documents, the material that predates the current doctrinal system." She paused. "I have been filing it incorrectly for 2 years because I was missing the framework for what it actually was." She looked at the documents, at the shapes of them in the pattern sense, the connections between them that were now visible. "It is not a theological archive. It is a comparative archive. It is the record of how the world's 3 information systems, the Dominion's administrative record, the Forest's bloodspeaker tradition, and the Triune Faith's theological structure, were originally connected to each other before the Empire system drove them apart." Keyor looked at her. "It is already both," she said. "The archive was already what I have been trying to build it to be. I just couldn't read it completely until now." He looked at the archive around him, at the West section and the 15 years of careful, patient work. "So the rebuild," he said. "Is not a rebuild," she said. "It is a reading. I built it correctly. I was reading it with insufficient capacity." He looked at her with the warmth that was now entirely unmanaged and entirely his. "How long," he said, "to read it completely?" With the completed mark, the full reading, she calculated. 3 years for the initial pass, longer for the full integration of the bloodspeaker records and the Triune original texts. She paused. "The West section reorganization alone would benefit from a second perspective," he said. "Someone who has read the bloodspeaker archive and can identify where the 2 systems are describing the same events." "Yes," she said. "The posting," he said, "is formally registered with the clan council for 3 years." "Yes," she said. "The archive was warm in the way of rooms that have been carefully maintained for a long time, the specific warmth of stone that has been at a steady temperature for decades. The documents were in their places. The West section waited for its proper reading." She looked at Keyor standing in the archive she had built, and felt the pattern sense's perception of the connection between them. Not the map's version of the connection, not the record of it, but the actual thing, the territory rather than the map, the specific and irreducible reality of what existed between 2 people who had read the same forest in different languages and arrived at the same truth. The archive's job was to hold things accurately. This was one of them. The formal submission to the Accord's review body was filed in the 43rd year of the current High Cantor of the Lightsinger's tenure, in the autumn month that Solon's order called the Long Amber and the Deepwood's Bloodspeakers called the First Memory, the time of year when the forest began its formal recording of the season's changes, the annual addition to the accumulated knowledge in the root system. The submission contained the following: the archive's master's complete evidence package, 14 months of work, the pattern sense running at full depth through the whole of the Dominion's administrative record and the original Triune texts, and the correspondence with Elder Sune of the Asheville and the Bloodspeaker Archive's formal documentation of the Divine Channel's state before and after the second burning. 67 documents. The cleanest and most complete evidential record the Accord's review body had ever received, according to their own formal acknowledgement. The War Council's formal findings. 7 clan speakers' testimony, including Thresh Kesson's full account of the informal arrangement and its origins, entered voluntarily into the record by a man who had decided, in the forest clearing, that the record was where he needed to be. The High Cantor's testimony. Given over 3 days, in the presence of the review body's full panel, in the specific, careful language of a man who had spent 37 years managing language in the service of concealment and was learning, at 64, the different skill of using it in the service of disclosure. The Bloodweaver Record, the first product of the Order's formal reconstitution, 7 surviving members, found through the pattern sense's tracing of what had been removed and the determination of what had survived its removal. Their initial report documented 23 years of systematic suppression, named names, and concluded with a formal request for the restoration of the Bloodweaver's original standing in the Triune faith structure. Elder Sun's formal statement, the shortest document in the package and, in the review body's assessment, the most significant. 6 sentences, in the Asheville's specific theological register, that were the formal acknowledgement of the divine channel's compromise and the review body's responsibility to address it. The review body's initial findings were published 4 months after the submission. The formal governance restructuring of the Leitzinger's order, the appointment of an interim high cantor, and the convening of the first triune faith restructuring in 300 years took place over the following 2 years. The Bloodweaver Order's restoration to full standing in the triune faith was the longest negotiation. Not because of resistance, exactly, but because 300 years of institutional drift required the patient dismantling of a great many things that had come to seem natural and were not. The Deepwoods Bloodspeaker Archive formal connection to the Dominion's administrative archive was the first of its kind. 2 records of the same world, maintained in different languages by different traditions, formally acknowledged as records of the same territory. The connection was housed not under the Dominion's governance or the Deepwoods' governance, but under the Accord's neutral structure, which was, the founding documents had always specified, the appropriate place for things that belonged to all the world's people rather than to any specific fraction of them. The archive's West section was reorganized. The reorganization took 4 months, working with a second perspective that had read the Bloodspeaker archive and could identify the places where the 2 systems had been describing the same events in different languages. The reorganized section was better than any previous version, not because it contained more documents, but because the relationships between the documents were more accurately rendered, which was the archive's actual function, not the storage of documents. The accurate rendering of the relationships between them. The master's formal introduction to the reorganized section, preserved in the archive's own record, concluded with a sentence that was discussed for some time afterward among the archivists and the Bloodspeakers and the Triune Faith's new generation of Bloodweavers, and the people who read the archive's work from the outside. The archive has always been the most honest map of the world available. The map is smaller than the territory. The gap between them is where the world actually lives, in the connections that no single record can fully capture, in the relationships between information structures that only become legible when the structures are held in genuine contact with each other. The work of the archive is not completion. It is better and better approaching. In the forest, the Deepwardens attended the autumn in the full depth of their restored capacity. The heart luminescenced at full concentration. The old-growth trees were old. Somewhere in the archive's sublevels, in the warmth of stone that had been at a steady temperature for decades, 2 people were reading the West section's new taxonomy and arguing, in the careful, precise, companionable way of 2 people who disagreed productively, about the relationship between one category and another. The archive held this, accurately, as it held everything, better and better approaching. This is the only kind of completeness that the honest world offers. The archivist understands this. The forest understands this. The gods, if the original canticles are to be believed, understood this from the beginning, which is why they made a world that was always, more than any record of it, more than any map, more than any person looking at it, alone, could see. Final note in the master's introduction to the reorganized West section. Varanthal Archive, year 344 of the Accord.